On a cold October night in 2003, Shirley Yates of Seattle, Washington was just about to get ready for bed when she heard a knock at the door. She approached the door and asked the person on the other side to identify themselves. The voice outside responded immediately. It was a salesman who just wanted a few moments of Mrs. Yates' time. This was odd for two reasons. First, it was almost 10 o'clock at night, much later than is usual for door-to-door salesmen. And second, the knock hadn't come from Mrs. Yates's front door. It was coming from the door to her bathroom. Has your home ever been visited by a door-to-door salesman? If you were born in the last 40 years, then your answer to that question is probably no. In the age of online shopping, the idea of a salesperson going from house to house hawking vacuum cleaners or encyclopedia sets feels like a relic from the past. It's highly unlikely you'd ever see one walking the streets nowadays, and equally unlikely that one would knock on your front door. However, if you live in Washington state, you might need to be wary of a certain salesman who is still doing the rounds. SCP-1879, also known as the indoor salesman and the doorman, is a phenomenon that manifests randomly in homes throughout Washington. Subjects will hear persistent knocking from the interior doors of their homes, and the affected door becomes classified as SCP-1879-1. The knocking doesn't stop until the door is opened, at which point the subject will be greeted by SCP-1879-2, a Caucasian man of indeterminate age standing around 170 centimeters tall. The man will claim to be a salesman and immediately try to pitch a bizarre product to the subject whose home he's just invaded. The SCP Foundation was first alerted to the existence of the indoor salesman when they had intercepted a 911 call coming from the home of Mrs. Shirley Yates. She had opened the door to her bathroom in an attempt to get the salesman to stop knocking, and once he was in her home, he refused to leave. According to Yates, he kept disappearing in and out of random doors in her house. Foundation Field Agent Rogers was equipped with a recording device and sent in to investigate the case with several other agents. When he arrived at the home, he found Mrs. Yates inconsolable. SCP-1879-2 was still rapidly talking at her, and strangely enough, the product he was holding and trying to sell to her was a border collie puppy. As soon as Agent Rogers entered the room, the man shifted his attention away from Mrs. Yates and towards him. He then started trying to sell the puppy to Agent Rogers. Agent Rogers did not want to purchase this puppy, but he found that the man spoke so quickly and urgently, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. The man was begging Rogers to take the puppy, practically shoving it in his face, saying that he didn't need any money, and that the only payment he needed would be some of your time. Rogers grew so annoyed at being talked over and interrupted that he ordered the other field agents to apprehend the indoor salesman. They did so, but as soon as the agents walked him out of the front door of the house, he disappeared without a trace. The agents remained in the area to monitor the situation. SCP-1879-2 manifested again in Mrs. Yates's home 6 hours later, still trying to trade the puppy for no money, just a little of her time, 12 years to be precise. After hours and hours of being worn down by this supernaturally pushy salesman, Yates relented and agreed to take the puppy, and immediately disappeared. The indoor salesman then disappeared himself through the closet door before he could be apprehended again. At a loss for what to do, the agents administered Class A amnestics to Mrs. Yates's family and left. The reason for her disappearance wasn't fully known until 12 years later in 2015, when she reappeared in the same spot she disappeared from, having no concept of how much time had passed. The puppy really had just cost her 12 years of her life. Stories like that of Shirley Yates have popped up all over the state in the years since, from Everett to Walla Walla and everywhere in between. Due to the random nature of SCP-1879 events and the way the indoor salesman can disappear instantly in and out of any door in a building, the SCP Foundation has been unable to capture him. The best they've been able to do is monitor 911 calls from across the state, listening for key words that might indicate another SCP-1879 infestation. When such an event is reported, the Foundation deploys Mobile Task Force Row 4, aka Shoes Salesman. This task force's entire purpose is to minimize the amount of harm the indoor salesman is able to cause by intercepting him before he can make a sale. This is a very important task, as evidenced by the story of Mrs. Yates, since while the products this salesman sells might be innocent, he doesn't accept payment in any normal currency. The price he asks for his products are always bizarre and often deadly. If all someone loses is 12 years of their life, they could be considered to be getting off easy. In one instance, the product being sold was a single red rose in exchange for the subject's heart. Once the deal was sealed, the subject dropped dead on the spot, with an autopsy revealing that his heart and circulatory system vanished from inside his body. In another, the indoor salesman offered 220 bananas and told the subject to simply give him some sugar. The subject agreed, and all candied goods in the home disappeared. In a third, the indoor salesman was trying to sell a thermonuclear warhead, the price of which was the subject's soul. The subject accepted, and at first nothing seemed to have happened. The Foundation confiscated the warhead and placed it into non-anomalous containment. Later that day, the subject went to listen to some music, only to find that 2 of her vinyl records had gone missing: Lady Soul and Almighty Fire by world-famous soul singer Aretha Franklin. So, even though he's incredibly invasive, annoying, and his transactions can be deadly, the indoor salesman still maintains a sense of humor. The fact that the Foundation can't capture the indoor salesman means that a lot of questions about him remain unanswered. The biggest by far is why he does what he does. In most SCP-1879 events, the indoor salesman seems frantic and desperate to make a sale. Often he will refer to having quotas and deadlines to meet, which implies some other unseen entity that he has to answer to. These questions remain unanswered because all attempts to interrogate the indoor salesman have been unsuccessful. When he manifests in a location, it's impossible to get him to stray from a sales pitch, and he disappears as soon as he successfully sells his wares. However, there was one instance where, after an SCP-1879 event took place, Foundation agents were there to witness a rare interaction between the indoor salesman and his mysterious employers. Agent Rogers and the rest of the shoes salesmen were called out to a home in Spokane, where rapid knocking had begun to emanate from the bedroom door. Equipped with recording devices, Rogers was able to record the voice of the indoor salesman coming from inside the bedroom. In the recording, the salesman grumbled to himself about not being able to meet his quota by tomorrow, saying that if he didn't, he'd be stuck in this world for the next century. He started knocking again, yelling through the door that he knew they were home. He kept knocking until he was interrupted by the sound of a phone ringing. The indoor salesman was heard picking it up, and Rogers managed to record the conversation. The person calling was, apparently, the indoor salesman's boss, who was calling to complain about his performance. Only one side of the conversation was heard, but evidently the indoor salesman's boss wasn't too happy about receiving 2 Aretha Franklin albums as payment instead of an actual human soul. The indoor salesman apologized for the joke, then told his boss, "It won't happen again, please don't hurt it. I'll meet the quota this time, I swear." He hung up, grumbling to himself again, "I better get to move up to at least accounting this time. I've paid my dues and then some." Rogers finally opened the door to the apparent disappointment of the indoor salesman, who was hoping to speak with the home's owner and was quite annoyed at having another one of his sales interrupted by MTF Row 4. Rogers tried to ask the indoor salesman who he'd just been speaking to on the phone, but as usual, the salesman started talking over him. "Now see here, let's think logically," he said. "You know I'm not going to tell you anything. I know you're not likely to buy what I'm selling. So let's just move on to greener pastures. I'm coming up close to a deadline, and I'm sure you're swamped with making sure good people don't lose their jobs, so I'll just be on my way and let you do that. Ciao." The indoor salesman tried to close the door, but Agent Rogers blocked it with his arm. He was tired of this SCP giving him the runaround, and he was going to keep the indoor salesman here if it was the last thing he did. He demanded the entity stay and be interviewed, and other members of the task force apprehended the salesman, making sure he couldn't leave the room. The indoor salesman, now held in place by several armed men, seemed to finally relent. He told Rogers, "I'm busy, so I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you something, no money out of your pocket, and we'll call it even. Sound good?" Rogers, just wanting to get this whole thing over with, agreed to those terms. 3 seconds later, every agent on the scene was dead, and the indoor salesman was able to straighten his tie, pick up his briefcase, and walk through the door to the bathroom. When the bodies of Agent Rogers and the rest of the MTF Row 4 were examined by Foundation scientists, the cause of death was found to be, in every case, thousands of coins suddenly appearing in not only their pockets, but also inside their stomachs, lungs, and even under their skin. Later that day, the indoor salesman was reported at a home in the same neighborhood. He was seen trying to sell the house's owner, 80-year-old retiree Alan Johnson, a Glock 18 pistol in exchange for his attention. As he had done so many times before, the indoor salesman disappeared through another door before the Foundation was able to reach the scene. And when the SCP arrived, they found Mr. Johnson still alive, but now missing his prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls attention. It's likely that, because of the nature of the entity, SCP-1879 might be entirely impossible to contain. The Foundation might never find out anything more than what they already know about the indoor salesman, the way he's able to manifest behind closed doors, or the reason he has to keep filling quotas for an unseen boss who apparently doesn't have a very good sense of humor. So, if you're ever in Washington State, be careful who you open your doors to, especially if the knocking you hear is coming from inside your house. The Tower of London, one of the most famous towers out there, next to the Sears Tower and the Leaning Tower of Pisa. A place where tourists go to gawk at history, uncomfortably large and bold ravens, and ask the timeless question, why are the guards called beefeaters? But enough jokes. This iconic site is no laughing matter. The tower is best known for its blood-soaked history as the site of hundreds of imprisonments and executions over the years, as well as a fair share of murders. 3 queens, Anne Boleyn, Jane Grey, and Catherine Howard lost their heads there. Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, were found murdered there, still only children when they died. King Henry VI was killed during his prayers in his private chapel. The list goes on, and the blood continues to flow. It is no surprise that many consider the Tower of London to be among the most haunted places in the world. Few locals have seen such an intense concentration of violent, tragic death and misery. There are reports of Queen Anne Boleyn wandering the halls with her severed head tucked under her arm, the little murdered princes frolicking through the corridors in the dead of night, and the Countess of Salisbury reenacting her horrific execution, in which she was hacked to death as she fled. If you're at all enthused in British royal history, you may know about all these people and their grisly ends already. But what you may not know about is a formerly imprisoned man known as the Wizard Earl. Henry Percy, 9th Earl of Northumberland, also known as Wizard Earl due to his involvement in the occult, was imprisoned in the Tower of London in the late 1590s. Though he was a prisoner, he lived a relatively comfortable life and was allowed to continue his research and build a small library of books and other academic materials in his room. He died in November of 1632, and the secrets of his research died with him. That is, until Martin Tower was being renovated hundreds of years later. During the process of renovations to the Martin Tower, a hidden chamber was discovered beneath the tower's structure. It did not appear on any official blueprints of the building. The chamber contained scattered notes and papers and a sturdy iron door. Despite several attempts, the door could not be opened by any ordinary means. Further investigation of the papers found in the chamber revealed that they were research notes penned by Henry Percy, who is thought to have created the chamber and the door within it. The notes were unusual and ominous, hinting at a sense of otherworldly danger. A particularly unsettling note was an unsent letter from Henry Percy to famed playwright Christopher Marlowe. In the letter, Percy apologizes to Marlowe for refusing to accept his warning about building the Janus Gate, a significant term as Janus is the Roman deity that represents buildings, transitions, and passageways. The letter also references a cursed play, most likely the Hanged King's Tragedy, or SCP-701, which Percy begs Marlowe to destroy. He ends the letter by saying that he has sealed the gate, permitting only the enlightened to enter it so that they might perhaps see what Percy could not. The letter concludes, "Damn that metropolis of blood, that terrible realm and its ancient countless crimes.
consign thy play to the fire, deny thy vile patron, and anoint thee from this madness. We would fain welcome thee back into the night.
More troubling, perhaps, than the contents of the letter itself is the date it was to be sent. May 30th, 1593, the day before Marlowe was murdered. Suspecting the presence of an anomalous artifact the Janus Gate referenced in Percy's notes and letters, the Crown hurriedly contacted the SCP Foundation and requested they perform a thorough investigation. What they found was unlike anything the Foundation has ever encountered, before or since. Henry Percy was speaking truthfully in his letter. He did seal off the door in his secret chamber. The only way to open it is to complete a series of alchemical instructions, similar to those used in the creation of a philosopher's stone. A resident alchemy expert at the Foundation assisted in finding the solution, and for better or for worse, the Janus Gate was unlocked for observation. Beyond the gate lies a city known as SCP-2264-B. The city is extra-dimensional, matching no known location on Earth or anywhere else. Upon entering the city, the smell of dried flowers and old books greets you. You glance up at the sky to find it an eerie yellow, spotted with infinite glittering black stars. If you look down at yourself, you will find that your clothes have disappeared, replaced with attire that would not be out of place at a masquerade ball. Your face is adorned with a Venetian mask that you cannot remove, no matter how hard you try, until you have left this strange world and passed back through the gate. If you pause to take in the sights of the city around you, you will find buildings carved from one single undetermined material, all in black, white, yellow, or red. These are the only colors present in the city. In the distance, a viscous black ocean laps at the shore on all sides. Though the ominous black liquid in said ocean is anything but water, the city, though it has been proven to exist in a corporeal state, has the quality of a lucid dream. Operatives inside of it report difficulty concentrating, citing a feeling of hypnagogic malaise, inability to control their impulses, and trouble describing what they saw and did inside of the city once they have returned to the regular world. The dimension seems to run on dream logic, best described in the movie Inception. Not everything makes sense, and transitions between place and time seem muddy, to say the least. After several expeditions that failed to return conclusive, coherent observations about the city's nature, another exploration was planned, chosen for his experience with altered states, mainly lucid dreaming and hallucinogenic drugs. Dr. Calixto Neves was selected to lead this exploration. Upon entering SCP-2264-B for his first exploration, most of Dr. Neves' colleagues split off from him to join in the decadent celebrations in the palace. He resisted this temptation, though of course he considered it for a moment, and continued on with his investigation of the city. He made several significant discoveries over the course of this first expedition, which informed the Foundation's perspective on the city going forward. First, he realized that the city somehow universally translates language. No matter what a person's native tongue is, they will hear the inhabitants of the city speaking in it. Some of Dr. Neves' colleagues heard the citizens speaking English, while he heard them speaking in his native Spanish. It is unclear how this instantaneous translation is accomplished. Second, he learned the name of the city, Alagadda, a city-state bordering something referred to only as the Neverment. To provide a little context and clarification, the city of Alagadda is a nexus point for a whole multiverse of hedonists. Countless entities from every conceivable dimension turn up here to sample its legendary pleasures. Think of it almost like a multidimensional Cancun during spring break. He was given this information by a foreign scholar known as the Wandsman of Kulmanas, a robed creature in a bird-like mask. The Wandsman was also able to provide some insight into the political power structure of Alagadda, providing Dr. Neves with his third piece of critical new information. The city is overseen by four masked lords: the Black Lord, wearer of the Anguished Mask; the White Lord, wearer of the Diligent Mask; the Yellow Lord, wearer of the Odious Mask; and the Red Lord, wearer of the Mirthful Mask. These powerful entities act as advisors to the city's mighty king, who many of the travelers in the city sought a favor from. The Wandsman warned about each of these lords, stating that in spite of their different names, They are all equally dangerous. They also warned against interacting with the ambassador of Alagadda. After this illuminating conversation, Dr. Nevaeh gathered the rest of his colleagues and returned to the real world. On his second expedition into Alagadda, Dr. Nevaeh immediately sought out the Wandsman of Kulmanas. The Wandsman expressed concern for Dr. Nevaeh and his team, warning them,
"The ambassador of Alagadda will soon return from Ariantum, and only the mad shall remain. I suggest you leave post-haste, for I intend the same."
When pressed on the subject of Aritium, the Wandsman explained that it is
a terrible city filled with equally terrible people. It is said that the Grand Karsis of Ariantum serves the designs of an elder being, a horror thought to rival even the hanged king of Alagadda.
Before Dr. Nevaeh could gather any more answers, the Wandsman stopped, becoming clearly frightened, and said,
"I sense the ambassador of Alagadda has returned. I take my leave of this place, and I suggest you do the same. Flee, do not delay."
The Wandsman promptly exited through the nearest door. Following Dr. Nevaeh's expeditions, the Foundation appointed a task force of agents trained in hand-to-hand combat and counter-occult strategies to go back into Alagadda. The task force, nicknamed the Abyss Gazers, was to seek out the king and ambassador of Alagadda and determine the level of threat they might pose to humanity. 12 agents were sent in, and only one, Agent Alexander Papadopoulos, came back alive. The other 11 are presumed dead or lost forever. Agent Papadopoulos was found unconscious and in critical condition outside of the entrance to Alagadda. A physical exam was conducted, revealing broken bones throughout his entire body, as well as severe internal bleeding. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks before the Foundation determined him healthy enough for an interview. The interview was conducted by Dr. Laxmi Narang and allowed the Foundation to get a sense of what Agent Papadopoulos witnessed inside the city and what happened to the other 11 team members. The team managed to locate the palace, struggling with the dreamlike effect of the city on the mind and the lack of ability to determine how much time had passed while they were there. As the group descended deeper into the palace, it became more convoluted and labyrinthine. They spent most of their time descending a staircase, traveling deeper and deeper. When they reached the bottom of the staircase, suddenly they were outside of the palace again, as if they never went inside. Except everything was a little bit different, wrong somehow. The whole world looked dark and drained of color, bathed in hazy gray light. There were no people to be seen, and the buildings looked run down and abandoned. They walked back into the palace from this strange new location and began to hear whispering, not just in their ears, but in their very minds. The ambassador of Alagadda had found them. It appeared before them, a tall, thin, dark figure, with no face, no mouth, no eyes. Somehow it spoke, in a language none of the team could understand, and it laughed. As it watched, unable to control themselves, the team began to tear each other apart. Flesh ripped, organs collapsed, bones shattered, and none of them could stop themselves until Agent Papadopoulos was the only one left alive. He was not left alive by mistake. The ambassador left him living in order to pass on the message of its existence. It dragged his limp body into the chambers of the king and forced him to look upon its twisted form. His exact terrifying words of the account paint a gruesome picture.
"Eventually, we stopped, and it lifted me into the air, held me up before the throne. There I saw the king. It was anchored in place, hollowed bonds around its corpse-like hands and throat, its face hidden beneath a veil. Impish creatures crawled all over it, caressing its twitching body as if intending comfort, while others pulled the tethers even tighter. The king trembled and quivered, and I saw the pale tendrils slither in and out of its tattered robes. I looked on as the veil was lifted."
At this point in this interview, the agent became inconsolable. He begged to be killed, a request which was denied. Before the interview ended, the agent said,
"A god-shaped hole, the barren desolation of a fallen and failed creation. You see the light of long-dead stars. Your existence is nothing but an echo of a dying god's screams. The unseen converges, surrounds you, and tightens like a noose.
After the interview, Agent Papadopoulos refused food and water and repeatedly requested to be terminated. This request was denied every time, and he was given a feeding tube for nutrients. After the revelations in the Papadopoulos interview, the Foundation suspended all research expeditions into Alagadda. It is difficult to hide SCP-2264 from the public due to the public nature of the building the gateway is located in. Because the Tower of London cannot be shut off to the public, the Foundation has focused on hiding the gateway from anyone who might accidentally stumble upon it. The government of the United Kingdom and the Foundation worked together to build a secret passage to SCP-2264, accessible only to authorized personnel. The original entrance has been walled off. Meanwhile, beyond the gate, Alagadda continues in its strange, twisted ways. We do not know what the ambassador wants, or the nature of the other beings lurking within the city walls, but we can only hope that they never find their way through the gate to us.
In June of 1985, Mark Johnson and his wife of 10 years, Sophie, were on vacation in Myrtle Beach having a great time. While they relaxed on the sand, Sophie decided to take a picture of her husband for their scrapbook. So she pulled out the Polaroid Supercolor 645 that she'd bought specifically for the trip. She pressed the button, waiting for the picture to print, pulled it out, and shook it. What she expected to see was a shot of Mark lying on his beach towel. What she got was a picture of her husband in the arms of his secretary. They say that a picture speaks 1,000 words, but this particular camera takes pictures that are worth even more than that. When developed, the pictures taken with this normal-looking Polaroid camera reveal the innermost desires of the person being photographed. Welcome to the story of SCP-978, the Desire Camera. The main reason the Foundation keeps SCP-978 under wraps is due to its use as an easy form of blackmail. All anyone with access to the camera would have to do is snap a few covert photos, and they'd have instant dirt on the world's most powerful people. To further stop this camera from falling into the wrong hands, the containment guidelines strictly forbid the use of the camera for anything other than simple documentation, and all uses of it must be thoroughly logged and checked. So, now that you know what the camera does, it's time to look at what kinds of strange and mysterious photos it's taken. After all, who doesn't want a chance to gain insight into the minds of the Foundation's most famous and dangerous inmates? First, to serve as a control, the team took a photo of a blue office chair. No change was recorded, proving that the camera didn't work on non-anomalous inanimate objects. Some of the earliest tests of the camera were the photos that the research team took of each other. One by one, the doctors and their assistants were photographed in neutral poses, smiling as if for a completely normal photo. Then they waited while the photos developed like normal Polaroids. Most of the research team had minimal changes in their photos. One was shown slouched in his chair drinking from a flask. One was shown in her civilian clothes, getting ready to go home from work. One doctor was in the exact same pose, but with a different colored tie on. The last assistant photographed, however, had their picture come out wildly different than how they were posed. Their desire revealed by the camera was so shocking that it had to be redacted, and the assistant was placed on temporary psychiatric leave. Following this first successful test, the doctor in charge of the project ordered a second round of tests to be conducted, this time on a series of D-Class personnel. A picture of one D-Class, who was photographed while eating in the cafeteria, showed up as scuba diving on vacation with his wife and child. He was allowed to keep the picture afterwards. Another had a similar result. He was photographed in a neutral pose like the members of the research team had been, and when the picture developed, the D-Class was seen holding a smiling baby, whom he identified as his 1-year-old daughter. After that, the results of the SCP-978 test started to get a little, well, weird. A notoriously twisted D-Class known as 7294 was photographed in his cell, and when the Polaroid developed, he was in the same cell playing a cello made out of a dismembered mannequin. D217-017 was a late-stage victim of SCP-217, a virus that turns organic matter into metal. You would assume that her innermost desire would be to be cured of her disease, but when she was photographed in her cell, the
The resulting Polaroid showed her completely made of metal, kneeling and praying at the base of a black obelisk. One D-class, who had been rendered comatose and was on life support, was photographed in their hospital room. Their picture showed them as only a limp, deflated skin in their photo. The photograph of another D-class, who had become increasingly listless and apathetic since their integration into the D-class program, resulted in a picture that was exactly the same as they appeared in reality, except the light in their cell was slightly dimmer. Intrigued by these results, the research team wanted to see how the camera would react to SCP-148, a type of metal that blocks the psychic properties of other SCPs. A helmet was made from the material and placed on a D-class who was given an adult magazine to read while his photo was taken. When the photo was developed, it was extremely blurry. Upon close analysis, the figure of the D-class reading the magazine could still be made out, and around him the faint images of several nude people could be seen. The research team wanted to see if the results were the same when the camera was used on animals. Photos of the lab mice and rabbits showed them eating or mating in their respective Polaroids. A zebra finch was shown escaping its cage, while a guard dog and its handler were shown playing fetch in the park. When cockroaches were photographed, there was no difference visible between the picture and reality. But the most exciting test results came when the camera was tested on other SCPs. For a few of the SCPs tested, there was no visible difference between the picture and reality. This was the case for SCP-173, the Sculpture, SCP-343, nicknamed God, SCP-014, an immortal man who is, over time, being turned into concrete, and SCP-063, the world's best toothbrush. When SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, was photographed in its glass case, the picture showed an unidentified individual wearing the mask, sitting on a throne and surrounded by 3 masked corpses. The team took a picture of SCP-043, a haunted copy of the White Album that was being interrogated while on a turntable. In the picture, the album was being returned to its sleeve. They then photographed SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, standing in his cell. In the picture, the Plague Doctor is hugging an unidentified small child and surrounded by instances of SCP-049-2. When they took a picture of SCP-050, a mischievous statue of a monkey reading a book, the result was predictably playful, given that SCP's history of pulling pranks. The photo that came out of the camera showed the camera itself, with another picture of itself coming out of the developing slot. Microscopic analysis revealed that this recursive photography kept going until the cameras in the pictures of the other cameras were too small to see. The team next photographed SCP-053, the young girl, and the photo was taken as the young girl was drawing with crayons in her cell. In the picture, she was riding through a sunny field on the back of her friend SCP-682. SCP-053 and SCP-682 were even wearing matching bows, dresses, and pink nail polish. When they took a picture of SCP-096, the Shy Guy though, the picture showed SCP-096's cell with nothing in it. SCP-085, the living 2D sketch known as Cassie, was photographed tinkering with a drawn car. In the developed photo, Cassie was engaged in the same activity, but both she and the car were now 3-dimensional. The team took a photo of SCP-106, the Old Man, emerging from a wall within his cell. When the photo developed, it showed the old man roaming a wheat field near an old farmhouse. From the porch of the farmhouse, an older woman is greeting SCP-106 with open arms. They also took a photo of SCP-168, a sentient calculator sitting on a table in its containment cell. In the picture, a teenage boy is seen doing complex math homework using the calculator. Next to him on the table are thick textbooks with titles like Complicated Math, Difficult Math, and Math You Need Your Calculator For. The photo of SCP-261, a vending machine that dispenses snack products from alternate universes, showed the SCP in its usual hallway, almost completely buried in coins. SCP-507, an otherwise normal man who unwillingly teleports between dimensions, was photographed while eating in the cafeteria. The developed picture showed him dressed as a Foundation researcher talking to other researchers. When SCP-682 was photographed, floating in its containment tank, the resulting picture showed the SCP surrounded by the corpses of all of the Foundation staff and mauling the person who had taken the photo. A researcher's note accompanying this photo reads, "Well, that was predictable." Yes, it was. Just for the fun of it, the team also tested the camera's effects on a few other Foundation personnel. They took a photo of Dr. Bright while he was arguing with Dr. Clef. The picture that came out showed a tombstone engraved with the words, "Jack Bright, resting at last." The team also took a photo of Dr. Clef as he stormed out in a huff following the argument. Given that Clef's face cannot be photographed, they were curious as to what the results would be. The picture showed little difference compared to reality, save for the fact that Clef's head was replaced by an image of a hand making a rude gesture. Upon closer examination of the photo, the team also realized that there was a young girl in the background who, strangely, had cloven hooves instead of feet. A young SCP-166 perhaps. The team then took a photo of Dr. Fisher holding his pet hamster. Contrary to expectations, the picture revealed not Dr. Fisher's desires, but the hamster's, showing the hamster sleeping peacefully in its cage, with Dr. Fisher nowhere to be seen. As you can see from these test logs, the effects of the camera are, well, inconsistent, with some photos showing very immediate, simple whims, and others showing the subject's deepest and most secret desires. While the researchers working with SCP-978 seemed like they had a lot of fun getting to peek into the minds of all their coworkers and test subjects, there's no telling what kind of pandemonium could be unleashed if someone on the outside ever got a chance to use it. Thankfully, the camera, which has been classified as safe for obvious reasons, is kept securely in security locker HJ12 at Site-17, which means none of us have to worry about our own pictures taken by the Desire camera leaking out. But if someone did get the camera out and took your picture, what do you think they'd see? Some of the anomalies the SCP Foundation deals with are dangerous, with the most powerful able to end all life and even reality as we know it. Others pose no threat at all and seem content to simply exist. Still others are something else entirely. SCP-4999 is a humanoid entity, though its appearance seems to fluctuate between manifestations, with the only unchanging detail being that it always is dressed in dark formal wear. Originally thought by many to be an urban legend, local tales of SCP-4999 are what initially tipped the Foundation off to its existence, and further research indicates that there are accounts that may be referring to the appearances of 4999 throughout recorded history. Strangest of all, though, is the consistency with which it appears, or rather the consistent situations and types of people it appears to. From the data available, it seems that SCP-4999 only appears to people in a very specific type of need, as you'll see in the case of a subject named Alex Hereford and the fateful night he experienced. The road was slippery, and Alex was driving too fast. He knew this, of course, but it's a different matter altogether to know a thing and to care about it. Rain hammered on the front windshield, the weak headlights of his 2005 Honda Civic barely punching into the thick black night ahead of him. Winding through the mountainside, the road was mostly empty, save for the very occasional twin beams of light blazing past him due to his high speed. It was hard to hear the honking of angry horns over the heavy pounding of the rain. Then it happened. In a way, Alex knew it was inevitable. His tread-worn wheels finally lost contact with the ground, thick layer of rainwater between them and asphalt betraying his speeding vehicle's grip on the road and sending it careening out of control. He had expected fear, but instead felt nothing really. A slight sense of anticipation, like wincing right before a punch lands in that childhood game of hitting each other on the arm. It wasn't that the world had slowed down, but perhaps his brain was simply working at a much greater velocity now, recognizing its own impending death. His speed of thought seemed magnified to the point of slowing his perception down. He heard of soldiers in war zones experiencing the same phenomenon, as they felt sure that in the next few seconds, they'd be dead. Alex wondered, would he smash into a tree, go off a cliff's edge? He could hardly see the forest or the terrain beyond in the thick rain and the dark of the mountain. Though he traveled this road a million times before, he had no idea where he actually was tonight. He supposed it wouldn't really matter, which it was. As usual, his thoughts turned to her, or rather, they had simply run their course and returned to the one place they always did. It wasn't like there were many other people to think about in Alex's mostly empty life. There was, and always had been, since the moment he'd met her, mostly just her. But even Alex's heightened state of mind couldn't delay the inevitable for long. It would be a cliff after all, Alex thought curiously, catching a glimpse of town lights far away and below. The car spun 180 degrees out into empty air, then came crashing down with a horrible roar of shattered glass and tearing metal as it tumbled down the hillside. Even over the torrential downpour, the noise of Alex's crash was significant, had anyone been around to hear it. Finally, after over 100 feet down a steep incline, the car smashed into a single thick oak tree, bringing the disaster to an end. As if on cue, the rain began to let up, slowly at first, then all of a sudden in that peculiar way that northwest torrential downpours tend to do, as if the sky had at last finished emptying itself all at once. Inside the shattered vehicle, Alex was, incredibly, alive, at least for the time being. The airbag deployment had spared his face the worst of it, and the sturdy aluminum frame of the vehicle had given its all in protecting Alex's body from the downhill crash. But even postmodern vehicle engineering had its limits. His breath came in slow, ragged gasps, difficult at first, but gradually steadying. Not an improvement in his condition, but rather his body dedicating the rapidly dwindling resources at its disposal into keeping vital functions going as long as possible. Opening his eyes, Alex was surprised to find himself right side up, less surprised to look down at the shattered mess his limbs and lower body had become. Gradually, Alex's thoughts cleared, his sense of self returning after the bone-jarring drop down the steep incline and sudden stop at the end. Looking to his right, he could see the trunk of the tree that had stopped his out-of-control tumble. Despite himself, Alex laughed, a weak, gurgling chuckle. So, it was the cliff and a tree after all. He focused on breathing, letting the waves of pain wash over him until his brain eventually canceled them out by injecting his broken body with adrenaline and chemicals. Everything was quiet and still after the crash and the rain, but to his surprise, he could hear something. It was faint at first, just a soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, but the sound grew louder and louder until at last, it came to a stop outside Alex's window. With every ounce of effort, Alex turned his head towards the sound. A rescuer? No, impossible. Nobody was up on this mountain, and nobody could possibly have reached him here so quickly, even if there had been. He supposed he should have been surprised, yet almost from the moment that his eyes fell on the tall, handsome figure with the casual yet fashionably cut black suit, Alex accepted him for what he was. There was no shock, no confusion. For the second time tonight, just a calm sense of acceptance. The man, probably somewhere in his mid-30s, leaned down to peer in through the window. He said nothing as he casually observed the extent of Alex's injuries. Satisfied, he laid a hand on Alex's shoulder. The grip was firm, but not painfully so, just strong enough to communicate, "I am here with you. Things will be all right." After a slight squeeze, the figure reached inside his jacket and produced a pack of cigarettes, packing the tobacco with swift taps against his palm before removing 2 cigarettes and offering one to Alex. Alex nodded his head, a very small motion that exploded pain across his shattered body. "No, thank you, but that stuff will kill you." Alex smiled. The man paused for a moment, the ghost of a smile showing on his face for just a moment before disappearing. Returning the offered cigarette, the man took his own and lit it, giving Alex a good look at his face in the light of his cigarette lighter. Alex had been right. The man appeared to be somewhere in his mid to late 30s. Handsome, but not cover model, so just pleasing to the eyes. He sported short hair, carefully combed and perfectly neat, completely unaffected by the slight drizzle that still fell. The more Alex looked at him, though, the less he could remember about the man's exact features. It wasn't that they changed in any way, but rather that he simply couldn't hold on to any details for more than a few seconds. "I'm dying, aren't I?" The figure didn't speak, nor did it nod or make any form of verbal or bodily communication. He simply looked, and Alex understood. Alex had never been particularly religious or spiritual, but in that look, he understood that there was a world beyond, and one that he would very quickly be entering into. It was as if, for the first time in his life, he was able to probe that world, reality peeling away just enough to glimpse what was beyond. Twisting paths through planes of shadow and light both, shuffling figures along each, and at the very center of it all, a light? No, a feeling. Love, pulsing forth like the beating heart of it all. The saints had their angels. the wicked their demons, but everyone else in between the two, they had him, a guide, someone to watch over them on their final journey. Alex coughed. It was ending soon. The man took a drag from his cigarette and removed a handkerchief from another hidden pocket, carefully dabbing away the blood around Alex's chin, then returned to his silent smoking. His vision was beginning to dim around the edges, the noises of the forest growing more and more distant. Alex knew it wouldn't be long now, but he had just one final thing to do. As he always knew they would, his thoughts returned to her, here, at the end. Once more, he turned his head towards the passenger side seat, pain exploding across his body with the motion. There, just on the far edge of the seat, as his phone, having miraculously survived the crash. It was no good though. Even if he'd been able to move his shattered right arm, he could never reach it with his fading strength. The smoking man took one final pull of his cigarette, putting it out on the side of the vehicle and pocketing the stub. Then he reached through the broken driver's side window, Alex catching a slight whiff of cigarette smoke blended with an unrecognizable but pleasant cologne. The man reached across Alex and grabbed the phone, pulling back and looking down at Alex's shattered right hand. After a moment, he reached down once more and put the phone in Alex's left hand. "Thank you." The words were barely a whisper. He had to concentrate now, willing the pressing darkness to part just long enough for one final task. The man once more placed his hand reassuringly on Alex's shoulder, and the darkness parted slightly, just enough for what Alex needed to do. He worked the phone awkwardly with his left hand, gritting his teeth through the pain of broken fingers. Opening a new message, he scrolled down his contacts. G, H, I, J, finally, K. He found her name at last, then began typing out a message. "I still think about you every time it rains." He moved his thumb to press send, but that's when Alex's body failed him at last, the phone tumbling out of his grasp. But the man was there to catch it. Moving blindly fast, he snatched the falling phone up and held it carefully to Alex's eyes before pressing send. He held the phone there for Alex to see through his fading vision until at last, message sent, confirmed successful delivery. The rain began once more, temperamental as it always is in the Pacific Northwest. Fat, heavy raindrops fell on the scene of a terrible accident, the victim seemingly having died on impact. On his lap, though, lay his phone, and somewhere far away and far below this dark mountainside, a message notification chirped on a distant phone. SCP-4999 manifests to only one person at a time, and only when they are alone. All subjects to date have been in the final stages of a terminal illness, suffering from a life-threatening injury, or otherwise on their deathbed. It also appears that all subjects have personalities and lives that could be described as nondescript, insignificant, or otherwise unremarkable. No testing of SCP-4999 has been authorized by the Foundation due to both the difficulty in predicting where it will appear, as well as the fact that observation seems to prevent the anomaly from appearing. There are also ethical concerns, since many in the Foundation feel that SCP-4999 is providing an important service to humanity, even if it is only for those on the margins of society, and it is debated whether this should be one anomalous creature that is allowed to continue its existence and its work. You're sitting in the middle of a cheering crowd. The arena around you is electric, fans hollering from their seats as they watch the basketball game. Every point scored, every shot missed, and every skillful pass of the ball sends waves of excitement over everyone in the audience. Applause, shouts, and chants fill the air. It distracts you for a moment. You find yourself swept up in the energy of the game. But slowly, surely, a nagging feeling creeps up on you as your eyes follow the ball. That feeling turns to a sickening realization as one of the players jumps and dunks the basketball, scoring another 2 points. You notice the look on his face, the same look on the faces of all the other players on the court, a solemn, hopeless expression. It's the same look of silent despair worn by all the spectators around you. Then you remember, you've watched this exact game of basketball before, many, many times before. And that is when you feel the same hopeless expression appear on your own face, realizing just how long you have been here, watching this game over and over, reminded that you will never, ever leave this arena. Welcome to SCP-1733. To the untrained eye, SCP-1733 seems to be a completely harmless item. Stored in a digital video recorder, it is kept securely in the dusty depths of the SCP Foundation's video archives. If any researcher is given permission to study SCP-1733, they will find it to be an ordinary VHS tape. But what about the contents of said tape? Does it contain a bizarre, disconnected series of black and white video clips that when viewed only give the watcher 7 days before the spirit of a drowned girl comes crawling out of their TV screen to kill them? Well, not exactly. But we're sure that if such a tape exists, the Foundation probably has it under lock and key, too. The footage on SCP-1733 is as seemingly banal as the ordinary VHS tape itself. When played, the viewer will witness a TV broadcast of a basketball game, specifically the 2010-2011 NBA season opener, broadcast on television and captured on tape by an unknown civilian. The game took place on the 26th of October 2010 in the TD Garden Arena in Boston, Massachusetts, a game where the hometown Boston Celtics took on the Miami Heat. By now, perhaps you are wondering what is so special about this particular game, and why the SCP Foundation would be so interested in keeping a VHS recording of it so secure. Is one of the O5 Council secretly a Celtics fan? Well, that's impossible to say for sure. What we do know for certain is that SCP-1733 is far more than just a harmless recording of a basketball game. The SCP Foundation first caught wind of SCP-1733's existence the day after the game. On October 27th, a Boston native that had watched and recorded the game made comments on social media about a technical foul that the game's referee had failed to pick up on. According to this individual, during the third quarter, an instance of unsportsmanlike conduct took place between Ray Allen and Chris Bosch. The person making these claims was quickly ridiculed by commenters on the same thread, but then this person uploaded a clip of this foul from the footage they had recorded. The other commenters were dumbfounded. During the original broadcast, that foul had never happened, but the recording showed it clear as day. The footage was quickly expunged and all traces of the clip removed from the internet by personnel acting on behalf of the SCP Foundation. Any that had viewed the video on Facebook or been a part of the comments debating this previously non-existent foul were tracked down via their IP addresses. All of them, including the owner of the tape, were given amnestics to wipe their memories of the supposed infraction, and SCP-1733 was returned to the Foundation for further analysis. Researchers at the Foundation were determined to understand the anomalous nature of SCP-1733 and why the footage contained on this particular VHS tape was so different from the basketball game's original broadcast. At first, the differences in the game seemed to be only slight changes from the one that actually aired on TV. A different foul here, a small point difference there. While the recording of the game contained on SCP-1733 was slightly different from the real-life game, perhaps even more interesting was that these differences changed with repeat viewings. Researchers wouldn't observe the same differences every time they watched SCP-1733, but would instead spot something different that had been changed each time they restarted the tape. And as they continued to watch and rewatch SCP-1733's footage, the true horror of the video's anomalous properties became more and more apparent. As the footage recorded on SCP-1733 began to diverge more and more from the original broadcast, researchers shifted their attention away from the basketball game itself and onto the people watching it. Just like the specifics of the game itself, the fans in the arena seemed to also change with every rewatch of the tape. And even stranger, the people in the crowd seemed to not only be aware of their existence within the footage, but also retain memories of every previous replayed vision. Each time the researchers had watched SCP-1733, the audience trapped within had gained more and more cognizance. Every man, woman, and child in the audience of that basketball game began remembering that they had seen multiple variations of the same game over and over again. This first became apparent to Foundation researchers when the game's commentators, two presenters named Mike and Tommy, began to comment on a strange sense of déjà vu they were experiencing. as they watched the Boston Celtics and Miami Heat play. Both seemed to share notions that the game they were witnessing was strangely familiar, and in later replays of the tape, these two commentator personalities were able to recall the events of the game with perfect, vivid accuracy. While they never addressed the viewer directly, this cumulative effect seems to have extended to every person that was present within the arena at the time that the original broadcast was recorded. Everyone, from the commentators to the coaches, the players to the patrons, all remember the diverging versions of the basketball game, but seem to have no awareness that they are trapped inside a recording on a VHS tape. It should be noted that it is still unclear whether the entities are real people or digital copies that solely reside on the tape. Every individual shown to be inside TD Garden on the 26th of October 2010 seems to be identical to their counterparts in the real world. Each of the basketball players on both the Boston Celtics and Miami Heat teams have the exact same level of talent as they do in reality, and their individual mannerisms are perfectly recreated in the SCP-1733 footage. And the same is true of the fans in the audience, each one appearing to be, in every conceivable way, a living human being. But the most unnerving aspect of SCP-1733 was found when the Foundation agents were tasked with tracking down members of the audience who were seen on the tape, and they found nothing. Unlike the players and coaches who can quite easily be found in our world, with many of them still playing or involved with professional basketball, personnel were unable to find a single trace of any of the people from the audience. Not one clue as to their current whereabouts or status. It is unclear how, but it appears that everyone shown on SCP-1733, especially those watching the game unfold from the stands, is a person trapped in digital form, stuck watching variations of the same match on loop. Researchers at the SCP Foundation who were studying SCP-1733 initially theorized that the tape had been designed to display an infinite variety of different game outcomes. Given that the tactics utilized by the players were different with each playback of SCP-1733, this seemed to be the case, that the tape was showing a what-if scenario each time the tape was rewound and played from the start. But the scenario wasn't resetting each time. It was clear that they were learning. By the 34th replay of the footage, the Boston Celtics and Miami Heat were so in tune with the opposing team's playbook that both sides' players were able to perfectly and precisely counter their opponent's moves, and kept the score at 0-0 for much of the game. At this stage in the Foundation's research, the players on the SCP-1733 tape had not yet become fully aware that they had played the same game already in earlier playbacks. But it is possible that weak memories of the earlier versions of the same match manifested as instinctive ways players could counter the moves of their rival team. However, by the time Foundation researchers had replayed the SCP-1733 footage 45 times, the players, their coaches, and fans watching the game had become aware of what was happening to them. It was at this point that the digital recording from TD Garden changed dramatically. Realizing that they'd been playing the same game of basketball over and over, the players refused to participate any longer. Everyone in the audience began to attempt to escape from the tape where they'd been unknowingly imprisoned, but not a single one of the stadium's doors would budge, and neither the fans nor the players seemed to be able to leave through any other exit out of TD Garden. Over the following playbacks of the SCP-1733 videotape, attempts at escape grew increasingly daring. In one playback, a full-scale riot broke out. In another, makeshift explosives were built and used by those trapped to try and blast their way to freedom. As their cognition grew and they began to remember friends and family from outside the videotape, the crowd trapped in SCP-1733 grew even more desperate. Players and their coaches retired to locker rooms, withdrawing from the crowd for a time. The rest of the people in the footage began to form factions amongst themselves, one of the more prominent calling themselves the Faith Keepers. These individuals voiced their belief that they had been confined to TD Garden as some form of spiritual punishment as a result of the consumerism that is rife in a post-industrial society. The Faith Keepers began burning offerings in the center of the basketball court. Phones, wallets, car keys, anything that reminded them of the modern world. Over the subsequent playbacks of SCP-1733, the Faith Keepers grew in their numbers, indoctrinating more of the crowd into their movement. Those still trying to escape from the stadium were causing more damage to themselves than their enclosure, with 3 men caught in the blast of another crude bomb placed on an exit door. Unfortunately for them, the door barely showed a scratch in the aftermath of the detonation. As Foundation researchers continued replaying the tape, those trapped within SCP-1733 descended into depraved acts, and incidences of violence became rampant. Some even attempted to take their own lives in acts of desperation, jumping from balconies in the hopes of ending the loop. Those that had joined the growing ranks of the Faith Keepers did not engage in such behavior, instead creating makeshift curtains to separate themselves from the breakdown that was taking place among the others trapped within the SCP-1733 tape. At some point beyond the 112th playback of the videotape, the Faith Keepers marched off screen and brought the basketball teams back out onto the main court. They then began a ritualistic sacrifice, disemboweling the professional athletes for their fellow prisoners to see. This had no noticeable effect, with the recording of the game resetting as it had done in earlier rewatches. In a later playback, the Faith Keepers then began to call for all the children in the stadium to be sacrificed in the same way. Testing on SCP-1733 was finally suspended indefinitely after this point, and as far as we know, the crowd remains trapped inside the anomalous recording of this particular Celtics Heat basketball game. Foundation researchers have been unable to produce the same anomalous effects as those of SCP-1733, even when using the DVR that originally produced the recording. The digital video recorder itself does not seem to imprint the same properties onto other VHS tapes, making SCP-1733 an isolated anomaly. However, the next time you find yourself at a basketball game, it might be worth asking yourself, have I seen this game before?
True horror. The airplane door, belching smoke, and a burning red light. The dead talking in ancient guttural Latin. A monstrous angel made of rings, wings, and eyes whipping barbed tentacles at screaming, terrified priests. You can scarcely imagine a more hellish place. Bishop Franklin's knees gave out under him as soon as the man set foot back on solid ground. Nearing his 70th birthday, he'd never been a particularly tough man, but after the day he'd had, he doubted he'd ever be the same again. Almost being ripped into another dimension, almost being at the center of a nuclear explosion, seeing. He threw up on the ground as the Foundation personnel rushed over to him. Never, never again. Just 8 hours earlier, Bishop Franklin had been getting on with his Friday preparations. They had Mass coming up this weekend, so he was doing the rounds of the cathedral, putting out new candles and straightening pews. He was nearly done, ready to get on with the rest of his morning, when he saw 2 suited figures entering the cathedral. He shuffled over to them, trying to explain that they were closed, but quickly faltered when he saw the grave look on their faces. Just 10 minutes later, he was in the back of their car, still holding a spare candle, with agents from the SCP Foundation sitting on either side of him. They handed him file after file, each most redacted, explaining the basis of who they were and where they were headed. It was a lot for the old priest to wrap his head around. He'd always believed in a higher power and a spiritual realm, but this sounded a whole lot more serious than that. Monsters, aliens, other dimensions, facilities, portals. He questioned the agents on it. They just looked grimly from one to another as the car wound its way to the private airstrip in the middle of nowhere. Bishop Franklin had always hated flying, but he hated it a whole lot more as he approached the airplane with no idea where he'd be landing. A small group of men were gathered on the runway just by the foot of a Boeing aircraft. It seemed like a pretty substantial plane for such a small group of them. He was at least a little heartened to see that none of them had brought luggage either. In fact, most of them were just like him. As Bishop Franklin approached the group, he recognized various faces, other bishops, archbishops, and senior priests. With him there, they totaled 7. The others all looked at him, not saying much. Bishop Franklin tried his best to start asking questions, but 2 things happened in quick succession that closed his mouth very quickly.
Firstly, the luggage hold of the plane was opened, and two enormous shapes were loaded into it via forklift. Each shape had unmistakable symbols on the sheets covering them. Nuclear danger. Reeling from this revelation, Bishop Franklin turned to the group to be face to face with the Pope himself. He immediately shut his mouth. You may also be wondering what on earth was going on at this airfield. The truth is, Bishop Franklin, along with 6 other priests of Abrahamic faiths, were about to embark on the monthly flight of SCP-616. Within this plane, as all of these men were soon about to find out, exists an emergency door. Covered with satanic iconography, this door, when opened at ground level, operates just like any other emergency door, leading to the outside of the plane. Although any individuals who had passed through this door in this normal state reported feeling heightened anxiety during and after. However, once a month, this door will be anything but normal, opening a gate to, well, you'll soon see. In order to mitigate the threat posed to humanity through SCP-616-1, or the Gate, the plane must be in the air at the time of its opening, far above and away from any human settlements. In order to keep this event contained, the door must be kept open for the duration of the portal's existence until it has closed of its own accord. But holding this door open is not a simple test of strength, it is a test of belief. In order to protect all of humanity from unknown horrors of a cataclysmic scale, 7 priests of Abrahamic faiths must be on board for this monthly flight, praying for the door to remain open. The ability to keep the door open, it turns out, is unrelated to physical prowess, but instead is based entirely on one's own belief that the door can be held open. As such, religious figures praying to a higher power are incredibly well suited to the task. Once per year, the flight is blessed by the Pope, and every time the plane takes off, it must be holding 2 nuclear warheads in its hull. Both can be remotely detonated by the ground team, who will be in constant radio communication with the pilot. Should the pilot fail to give them regular updates on the status of SCP-616-1, the event will be treated as an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, and both nuclear devices will be detonated without hesitation. But Bishop Franklin only knew about half of this information from his redacted set of documents and had forgotten half of them on his stressful car journey. As he strapped himself into a window seat, he was trembling like a leaf. He desperately wanted to complain about being put into this situation, but he wasn't entirely sure who he would complain to. If he spoke to anyone external about what he was about to witness, he had been told by the Foundation agents that he would be administered with a Class C amnestic, whatever that meant. He really didn't want to find out. Fortunately for him, the most familiar of the faces from the group of priests sat next to him in the aisle seat. Bishop... what was his name? Sensing Bishop Franklin's uncertainty, the man reached to hand over and warmly reintroduced himself. Bishop Pete. They'd met 2 years ago in Berlin. Just that small action was almost enough to settle Bishop Franklin's nerves as the plane started to barrel down the runway. Almost. The plane took off, causing the old man's stomach to drop. Heart hammering, he looked around, spotting the emergency door. It was just up ahead of him, around the middle of the fuselage. It would have looked like a normal emergency exit, but for the blood-red markings scrawled across it. A wave of dread washed over him. It certainly looked evil, that was for sure. Trying his best to help, Bishop Pete struck up a conversation. He explained it wasn't his first time doing this. He'd been drafted to help 3 months ago. It was scary for sure, but everything was totally fine. The Foundation had planned everything to a T. It would have helped Bishop Franklin's nerves, but it only made his mind jump to the nuclear weapons he'd seen loaded into where his suitcase would have normally gone. The two of them lapsed into silence for a while. No one on the plane was really speaking. He supposed he should have used this opportunity to pray, but according to his briefing, he'd be doing a lot of that very soon. He hadn't entirely understood what the Foundation had meant by that. He'd been told to pray to, quote, keep the door open. What had they meant by that? A bang shattered the silence as the emergency door slammed wide open. In an instant, the plane went into a nosedive as all the air rushed from inside. The The lights went out for several seconds, then came back on in flashing, panicked spasms. Bishop Franklin clung for dear life onto the back of the chair in front of him as the roar of air rushed around him. It had gone dark outside, with shapeless clouds swirling around him, shaking the plane. Screaming voices filled the aircraft. Not just the voices of the men on board, but women and children too, crying out in agony and terror through throats that sounded like they'd been lashed with razor wire. Then he saw it. SCP-616-1. The gate was wide open. Smoke billowed out of it, crawling along the floors of the cabin like an octopus creeping its way along the ocean floor. Red light seemed to spill out of it, but when he tried to look through the gate itself, it was like his brain wasn't working anymore. There were colors there, but there were ones he didn't recognize. Maybe they weren't colors at all. It was like his brain fixated on trying to sort them into something that made sense, something rational. A hand grasped his arm and he turned to see Bishop Pete staring at him with wild eyes. The plane was going down, they could both feel it, and that emergency door was slowly creeping shut. They had been brought onto this plane for one job only, to pray, like their lives depended on it. Bishop Franklin screwed his eyes shut and clasped his hands together. He hadn't prayed like that since he was a little kid, but he figured now was the time to use all the tricks in the book. He begged and pleaded in a tiny voice for God to keep that door open. It felt so counterintuitive, so backwards, to want to keep that kind of door open as the air roared and screamed around him. But a small voice inside of him told him to persevere, have a little faith. But suddenly, the bishop noticed that the man sitting alongside him had fallen silent. Feeling like a naughty child at mass, he opened one eye and peered sideways. Bishop Pete was still in his seat, but he'd slumped over. He wasn't breathing. His skin was cold to the touch, deathly cold. Then all of a sudden, his head rocketed backwards and he started talking. Not talking like a normal man, but talking like a man possessed. His dead eyes rolled around in his head aimlessly as guttural voices rasped out of his throat. None of them were the words that Bishop Franklin recognized. They sounded almost like Latin, but far darker and more ancient. And the more the dead man spoke, the more the emergency door closed. The bishop started praying again, much harder this time, digging his fingernails into his palms so hard that he felt them drawing blood. He needed to keep this door open. He had to, and he could. He believed it entirely in that moment. The door banged back open, wider than ever despite the chanting of the dead body in the seat next to him. Nightmares swelled to the forefront of his mind as the plane hurtled to the ground. Only the plane wasn't hurtling to the ground. In fact, it was flying at a perfectly steady altitude of 10,972 meters, with an airspeed of about 780 kilometers an hour. In fact, aside from the death of Bishop Pete, everything within the plane was going perfectly to plan. Deaths of priests were just an occupational hazard of keeping this SCP contained. The pilot at the front of the plane regarded the whole situation playing out behind him while feeding constant information back to base. Everything was going perfectly according to plan, until the angel appeared. Bishop Franklin wasn't the first one to see it. That was the unfortunate lot of Archbishop Michael, who was sitting closest to the emergency door. He first spied it while staring through into the void, but his screams of terror, warning those around him, were drowned out by all the other commotion. It was only when the angel's wings crept their way through the edges of the door and the creature let itself into the cabin that the others saw it. But by this point, it was too late for Archbishop Michael. The angel was not like the angels we see in pop culture, a tall blonde person with white robes, fluffy wings, and a gentle face. It was a shifting mess of eyes and tortured wings, partially crawling along the ground, partially floating under the weight of its massive frame. It had to squeeze itself through the door to fit into the plane, but as it did, it lashed out at the Archbishop with a sinewy tendril and got to work, violently killing him. That was when Bishop Franklin saw it and began to panic. He wanted nothing more than to stop praying, to let the emergency door slam shut and keep this creature away from them. But that little voice inside his head told him that wouldn't work. If that door was allowed to close before the gate had, then it would cause the apocalypse. He could not have that blood on his hands. So he prayed, sweat pouring down his face as the angel forced its way through the gate and into the cabin. He prayed as it slumped across the aisles, working its way along the line of men, slaughtering them one by one. He prayed as it saw him and rose to its full height, unfurling great wings and readying itself for the kill. And he prayed as a wind more powerful than any on earth blew through the cabin and pulled the angel back through the gate. The emergency door slammed shut, and in an instant, the plane seemed to right itself. No more turbulence, no more wind. The light flickered once more and then came back on steadily. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling about 4 hours too late. Bishop Franklin couldn't believe the time when he looked at his wristwatch. He had been on this plane for weeks, surely, not just 4 hours. That was absurd. It all felt like a dream as the aircraft circled around the airstrip, preparing for landing. Everything in the plane seemed totally normal to him now, except of course for the 4 dead bodies, one of which was slumped towards him in the aisle seat. The plane landed. The bishop staggered down the stairs and threw up on the blacktop. After a few awkward moments, the pilot sidled over to him and muttered a quick thanks. "I was really close to calling it a failure there and having to set off them nukes. I don't know what you prayed for, but you did good today." Bishop Franklin didn't feel like he did good. He felt like he'd had his whole life, his whole worldview, turned upside down in the space of an interstate flight. He had been moments away from either being vaporized by a nuclear bomb or from having economy seats to the premiere of the destruction of the world as we knew it. But just 31 days later, Bishop Franklin was on that same flight again, praying his hardest as the aircraft dropped into freefall. If there was one thing that the Foundation noticed about working with religious leaders, it was that they had a real determination to keep coming back to help keep the world safe. What the Foundation didn't have the heart to tell them was that all of the satanic markings on the door were actually fake. They had been added by researchers in an attempt to make SCP-616-1 carry more significance for those in the aircraft. Later testing revealed that it was not exclusive to Abrahamic faiths, or any faith groups for that matter, that they could keep the gate open. Anyone who believed they could do it was capable of it. Faith leaders, however, are still being utilized, and the blessing is still being performed by the Pope on a yearly basis. It had been found that these external rituals, while not necessarily directly impactful, have strengthened the belief and resolve of those inside the plane, yielding fewer casualties and shorter durations. Various experiments have been conducted to see beyond the event horizon of the gate, to see what's on the other side. Those in the plane have reported as having the name Paradise, despite never going inside. A remote-controlled rover was sent inside the gate on one experiment, but the footage was deemed far too dangerous as all those who witnessed it died within 2 months. Hopefully, you didn't peer too closely into the gate as you watched this video. It was New York City in the 1960s, and the city was lit up with color and life 24 hours a day. From the madmen of the Madison Avenue advertising companies with their crisp, pressed suits, slick haircuts, and even slicker salesmanship to the revolutionary art and culture of Greenwich Village, it was the place to be. From dusk until dawn, then all throughout the day, the streets were positively flooded with people on their way to work, headed out for a night on the town, or looking to get into some trouble. It wasn't likely that you would notice one man keeping to himself, his hands in his pockets, the brim of his hat pulled low over his forehead and casting a shadow over his eyes. Unless, of course, you were looking for him. You see, this particular man had caught the attention of a particularly unsavory group of fellows. The DeMauro crime family was not the sort of group you wanted to get on the bad side of, especially the family's eldest son, Mario DeMauro. And unfortunately for this quiet man in the slate gray suit, keeping his head down, he had found himself smack dab in the middle of Mario's bad side. He hadn't done anything wrong, really. He'd been walking by a bakery a few days prior when he bumped into a little old lady by mistake. He didn't mean to bump her, he didn't mean to make her stumble, and he certainly didn't intend to make her drop the birthday cake she was holding. But it all happened just the same. The cake box fell to the ground, the cardboard crumpled, and suddenly there was vanilla sponge and buttercream frosting splattered all over the filthy city sidewalk. The strange man helped the little old lady back up to her feet and apologized for the trouble as she cried that her son's 30th birthday was ruined. He watched her adjust her hat and run away, and felt a pang of regret. but soon forgot all about the cake, the lady, the birthday. Mario didn't. His friends called him Mario Birthday Boy DiMauro for a reason. All year he looked forward to one thing, his favorite cake from his favorite bakery, delivered to him by his favorite person, his mother. When Mrs. DiMauro described the stranger who had caused her to drop the cake, Mario decided that this disrespect to him, to his mother, to his entire family would not go unpunished. He sent out a group of his favorite lackeys, Bobby the Weasel Passarella, Vernon Two Knife Galletti, and Ben the Mammoth Santoni. They tracked the man down, figured out his usual haunts, his schedule, the streets he walked down every day, and reported back. Mario gave the order. It was time to make their move. And so, on that ordinary day, as that nice, neat, polite man walked down the street, his cake mistake far from his mind, Mario and the boys watched from the shadows. Ordinarily, Mario wouldn't involve himself directly in this kind of nasty business. He would send others to do his dirty work. But this was personal, and he wanted to be there to see the look on this disrespectful stranger's face as he learned his lesson. The men trailed him all day, waiting until it was dark, until the man was alone. Then, and only then, they would strike. Curiously, the man never did much of anything other than walk around the city avoiding others. If someone spoke to him, asked him for directions, he would answer them courteously, but then he would continue on his way. Once he stopped at a restaurant for a steak and a glass of water, but he seemed to have no job, no family, no friends, or really much of a life at all. Though the others were perplexed, Mario was delighted. There was no one to miss this man once he was gone. This would be even easier than he had expected. As the streets grew darker and the night deepened, the mobsters prepared to execute their attack. Armed with knives, guns, piano wire, and all their trusty usual suspects, they were poised for the perfect moment. And that perfect moment had arrived. The strange man turned down an alley and the group followed him into the shadows. They were just about to corner him when the man turned around and faced them. "Excuse me, gentlemen." The man spoke in a clipped voice, refined but cold, with an accent none of them could quite place. "Would you care to explain why you've been following me all day? It's becoming a bit unsettling." The group froze, shocked. What kind of game was this guy playing?
"Listen here, wise guy," Vernon said,
holding one of his signature 2 knives in each hand.
"We don't take kindly to folks with bad manners. We thought we'd give you a good old-fashioned etiquette lesson."
"Have we met?" the strange man asked, perplexed.
"No, but we're about to become well acquainted."
Vernon took a step forward, the blades glinting menacingly in the limited light. There was nothing behind his target but a closed-off alleyway, nowhere to run. "I don't think you want to do that." The man held his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Please, it would be a terrible idea." Vernon laughed.
"Would you get a load of this clown?"
Ben shrugged his massive shoulders and cracked his knuckles. Bobby wound the sharp piano wire around his fists, ready to wrap it around the stranger's neck.
"Enough small talk! Got him, Vernon!"
Mario called out, stepping forward to get a better look at his intended victim.
"I've had just about enough of this."
At his boss's word, Vernon rushed at the stranger, stabbing him in the stomach. Suddenly, he cried out, one of his knives falling to the ground with a clatter. He grabbed at his own abdomen, stumbling back as blood poured between his fingers.
He got me!"
"With what?" called Ben. "I tried to warn you." The stranger sighed, almost sounding disappointed that no one had listened to him.
"Forget it, I'll handle this."
Bobby grabbed a hold of the stranger, pulling the piano wire tight across his throat. No sooner had the wire tightened across the man's windpipe than Bobby was on his knees on the ground, clawing at his own throat as he gasped for air. A thin line of blood trickled down his neck. There, something invisible, small and sharp, had cut into his skin. Ben rushed to the side of his fallen brethren, picking them up in his massive arms and pulling them back out of the way.
"I guess if you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself,"
Mario said, pulling his favorite pistol out of his pocket and aiming it directly between the stranger's eyes.
"Please, you don't want to do this,"
the stranger begged, but Mario wouldn't yield.
"Oh, I very much do. Call it a belated birthday present."
And he pulled the trigger. When the police arrived to investigate the sound of gunshots, they found a bizarre sight. 4 gangsters lying dead on the ground from a gunshot wound, choking, stabbing, and a heavy blow to the head. At the center of it all, there was one man, completely unharmed except for a hole in his shirt and some dirt on his suit. Unsure what else to do with the situation, they arrested the man and brought him in for questioning. The murder suspect had no identification on him and refused to give the officers a full name, so they threw him in a holding cell and designated him a John Doe. They questioned the man for hours, trying to get him to explain how he had taken down 4 of the city's deadliest gangsters without getting a scratch on him, or where he had managed to stash his weapons before the police got there. Every time he insisted, "I never touched them." At the same time, the SCP Foundation was combing their way through arrest records, looking for any signs of the strange and unusual passing through police custody. They paid particular attention to John and Jane Does, looking for people with superhuman abilities or unexplained characteristics. The events in New York City caught their eye, and a Foundation operative was dispatched to retrieve the strange man from the NYPD. They found him sitting in his cell, reading a newspaper, refusing to answer any more questions. When the operative noticed a large bruise on the attending officer's face, he stammered,
The guy wasn't cooperating. I tried to show him I was serious, but this happened."
"He hit you?" the operative asked. The policeman simply shook his head.
"No, I don't know how he does it. I hit him."
The man was released into the custody of the SCP Foundation and officially designated SCP-073. SCP-073 is a man of Middle Eastern descent, standing at 6 foot 1 inches tall, with black hair and blue eyes. He appears to be in his early 30s, but research indicates that he is much older than that. He looks like an average man with a few noticeable exceptions. His arms, legs, spinal cord, and shoulder blades have been replaced with metal of some kind. When asked about these metal additions, the subject seems surprised and insists that he has no memory of when or why the alterations were made. He has a symbol carved into his forehead, which has not yet been translated, though it seems to be Sumerian in origin. The subject is aware of the symbol's presence but does not like to discuss it at all. He becomes distressed whenever it is brought up and refuses to explain. SCP-073 has the needs of an ordinary human being and requires regular consumption of meals as well as plenty of water. He subsists on a strictly animal-based diet of various meats and cheeses, which are provided for him on demand. He refers to himself as Cain and is generally friendly and polite to everyone he interacts with, if a bit formal and stiff. He is extremely helpful and has volunteered to help out with various tasks around the Foundation's site, from cleaning and general maintenance to assisting in research. He prefers to provide assistance on the research side of things, largely due to his photographic memory, wide knowledge of world history, and fluency in most of the world's common spoken languages. When he was first brought into Foundation custody, he provided evidence of these skills via a placement test in French, German, English, Japanese, Mandarin, Italian, and a dozen other languages, a trivia contest where he bested the Foundation's top historian, and a memory exam wherein he read an entire 800-page dictionary in a minute and a half and was able to recite every single word without help. In addition to his intelligence and some of the unusual aspects of his appearance, the subject also possesses some impressive and strange abilities. Cain's physical presence is deadly to any life grown in soil, from fruits and vegetables to trees, grass, and anaerobic bacteria. Any soil that Cain sets foot on will experience this effect, which extends to all land in a 20-meter radius. Cain also has a destructive impact on plant-based material that has undergone processing, including paper and wood, and on produce that has been grown hydroponically. It is unknown why his presence has this effect, but it influences everything from his diet to the furniture placed in his containment chamber. Cain is impervious to physical harm, which is not out of the ordinary for an anomaly in the custody of the SCP Foundation, but the way in which this invulnerability manifests is particularly notable. Any violence that is directed towards Cain bounces off of him and turns back on his attacker. Whatever is done to him will affect the person attempting to hurt him. This applies whether a person means harm or not, and whether they use a weapon or their bare hands. Though the harm done to Cain does not show up as a physical injury, he does still experience the sensation of pain, and has requested that the Foundation refrain from any especially painful tasks, especially since he has been so cooperative with their research. SCP-073's resistance to any physical damage has made it difficult for the Foundation to perform any in-depth medical tests on him. A few days after he was first brought into the research facility, a team of scientists begin to take various DNA samples. At first, the process went smoothly. They cut off a small piece of Cain's hair, swabbed his mouth for a saliva sample, and scraped a few dead skin cells from the surface of his arm. Then, with the man's permission, they decided to go a bit deeper and take some blood and tissue samples. This is where the trouble began. The researcher in charge of taking the blood sample complained of a sudden sharp pain when she pricked Cain's arm with the needle, occurring in the small part of her own arm. Nevertheless, she pushed through and took a small vial of blood. However, when the blood was tested, it was found to belong to a 40-year-old woman. Somehow, instead of drawing blood from the test subject, the needle had filled the vial with the researcher's own blood. The research team tried again, with a different doctor administering the blood test, but the same thing happened again, and again, and again. Each time, the person taking the blood sample somehow extracted a small amount of their own blood. When the team attempted to take a small tissue sample from Cain, cutting off a tiny portion of skin with a scalpel, the same thing happened. Cain's skin was left completely unharmed, and the tissue sample wound up belonging to the doctor who took it in the first place. Eventually, after a lot of trial and failure, the head researcher declared that there would be no more medical tests performed on SCP-073. "If we keep going at this rate, we're going to have to organize a blood drive," he quipped when pressed on the matter by higher-ups. Why nobody asked him to take his own blood is, to this day, a mystery. Because the attempts to test Cain's blood and other organic tissue have proven fruitless, the research team turned their attention to the more inorganic parts of his body, namely the portions of unidentified metal located along his limbs, shoulder blades, and spine. After taking a closer look at the metal, one research assistant suggested that it might be beryllium bronze, a metal that has appeared under a variety of other anomalous circumstances. SCP-073 confirmed that this metal originated in the Middle East many years ago, but was unable to provide an exact date, location, or purpose of origin. Beryllium bronze has been identified as a component in several SCPs so far, including SCP-1216, SCP-1427, SCP-2481, and SCP-2711. Further research into the unusual metal and its connection to many ancient civilizations is considered a top priority. Currently, Cain is kept at SCP Foundation Site-17, where he is permitted to roam freely as long as he does not leave the facility or come into contact with any plant-based SCPs, or plants of any kind. A new researcher that encountered Cain in the site asked him for his opinion on a bouquet of flowers the researcher had purchased for his wife. Before Cain could protest, the researcher had placed the bouquet in his hands, where it immediately disintegrated, much to the distress of both men. Cain apologized profusely and told the researcher that he would offer to pay for a new bouquet, but unfortunately, he did not have any money. A memo was sent out to all site staff later that day to remind them of Cain's effect on plant-based life forms. Due to the frequent staff turnover at SCP Foundation sites, this reminder is issued on a regular basis. In addition to the reminder about plant life exposure, Foundation staff are routinely reminded that they must never use any violence against SCP-073 under any circumstances. Great emphasis is placed on the fact that this rule is for their own safety, not for the safety of SCP-073, though most of the staff know by now not to deliberately harm SCP-073 in any way. Accidents still happen, and one careless moment could result in unintentional self-injury. For example, one day Dr. Byer was having lunch in the cafeteria, walking to his seat with his favorite dish, a steaming hot bowl of tomato soup, with a grilled cheese sandwich on the side. He had specifically asked the kitchen staff to make it as hot as possible, so that it would still be warm when he had finished his sandwich and several chapters of the book he was reading on his break. As he passed SCP-073, who was enjoying a meal of his own, Dr. Byer tripped and spilled his scalding hot soup all over the man's back. Before he could react, he fell to his knees in pain as blisters and burns erupted across his own back. Cain jumped up from the table with a surprised yell, but his skin remained unblemished. Dr. Byer, on the other hand, had to spend the rest of his lunch break in the medical wing, and never got to finish that soup. Cain is permitted to interact with other SCPs as long as interaction between the two is not considered dangerous for one or more parties involved. He has not expressed much interest in other SCPs, with the exception of the few that are permitted to roam the facility as they please. For example, he has engaged in some polite small talk with SCP-507, and always gives a friendly pat on the head to SCP-999 whenever he bumps into it. There is one SCP, however, that Cain has specifically requested he never be in a room with. SCP-076, also known as Abel. Though he has kept his personal knowledge of SCP-076 to himself, Cain has admitted that he knows everything about the man. He would not elaborate further, and simply said that it would be better for everyone involved if the two never met. No one knows for certain what would happen if those two superhumans came face to face, but if someone as powerful as Cain is afraid of the consequences, it certainly cannot be good. Everybody remembered where they were, what they had been doing, when the SCP Foundation revealed themselves to the world. It was an event that had so fundamentally changed the lives of every person on Earth that it became pretty hard to forget that momentous, horrible day, even though for most people, it had begun as a day like most others. Dane Moss had been at home when it started. His roommates were talking about buying an air hockey table for their place, something to liven up their Saturday nights. Even as he half listened to them discussing it, Dane figured it would never happen. He was right, of course, but he never could have anticipated the thing that stopped it. All of them had stopped and fallen silent as the news report came through. A group calling themselves the SCP Foundation, previously responsible for the containment of anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena, had declared its new intention to exterminate the entire human race. Dane's split-second belief that the broadcast was a Cloverfield-style viral marketing stunt for a new movie was quickly disproved when the ground started to shake. Unbeknownst to him, the Foundation was not only real, but had detonated nuclear charges along the back of SCP-169, an enormous ancient arthropod that's body had made up an archipelago adrift in the ocean. The detonation caused the Leviathan to stir, resulting in massive earthquakes and tsunamis. Dane was the only one to make it out of the apartment alive. Elsewhere, Joe Reese had been grabbing a coffee on his way home from work. He briefly overheard the news report, but barely paid it any mind. Then, waiting for his flat white, wondering what the holdup was, he caught a part of a conversation between two people behind him.
"What is that thing?"
one asked.
"I don't know, but its face is pure nightmare fuel,"
the other replied.
"A bunch of pictures of it just appeared on everyone's socials. It's really freaky stuff."
A sudden shriek went out from a number of the coffee shop patrons. Joe noticed a towering humanoid shadow being cast by something behind him. Its arms were stretched out disproportionately long, and it was attacking the two people behind him. Acting on an instantaneous fight-or-flight response, Joe ran, without looking back to see SCP-096 slaughtering everyone that had seen its face. Around the same time as the Foundation's ominous announcement was played over every news channel on the planet, Renee Hudson and Sky Soto had been on a date. The pair of them had been enjoying hanging out, playing a few mildly competitive games at the bowling alley, but there was still something unspoken lingering in the air. Neither Sky nor Renee really felt any connection. They liked each other's company, but that was as far as it went. Although neither one of them knew how to broach the subject for fear of hurting the other's feelings, and in the same vein, neither of them could have predicted the commotion that would happen next. The noise came from outside, the deafening screams followed by a flood of people running for their lives. Hundreds, if not thousands, were fleeing, any that fell over in the street being trampled underfoot by everyone behind them. Human beings moved like a mass of ants clambering over each other to get away from a gigantic, ferocious lizard. Despite the news broadcast declaring themselves and their intentions to wipe out all of humanity, nobody on the ground would ever be able to comprehend just why the Foundation unleashed SCP-682 and allowed the hard-to-destroy reptile to slaughter innocent civilians in droves. While they didn't know it, or may not have agreed, Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe were all lucky to have survived the initial anomalous onslaught unleashed by a rogue SCP Foundation. It did little to ease the pain of being displaced from their homes, forced to migrate across the country to join camps of other survivors, made refugees by anomaly attacks, and the efforts of apathetic agents of the Foundation. And of the four of them, not one could have predicted the shared fate that awaited them. During the months in the wake of the Foundation's opening assault on mankind, Renee and Sky had mostly stuck together. They had moved further and further south, managing to stay safe. Neither one had thought about their awkward date in months. They were just grateful to have someone they knew to stick together with. Meanwhile, Joe and Dane were hopping from one refugee camp to the next much in the same way. moving north and eastward, respectively. After deploying their first wave of anomalies, the SCP Foundation's efforts had shifted to primarily focusing on groups of interest that could pose a threat to their plans. While organizations with knowledge of the anomalous, like the Global Occult Coalition, were among the first in their crosshairs, the civilian population was left living in fear, but unscathed. That is, until the Foundation began targeting the refugee camps. One of their tactics was to unleash SCP-2241, a 7-year-old boy with reality-warping powers, into survivor communities to act as a living weapon, destroying the larger refugee camps. It was the increased frequency and ruthlessness of the Foundation's attacks on human survivors that forced Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe to unknowingly converge on each other. Camps for survivors started getting smaller, consisting of only a handful of people, in the hopes that this would make it easier for them to avoid detection by the Foundation. Arriving and hopping off the back of a jeep with only the clothes on their backs, the 4 strangers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been brought to an abandoned dock, the wreckage of an overturned cargo ship laying on its side in the harbor. Shipping containers were scattered all around, looking as if they had spilled out of the boat and onto the dock. The driver of the jeep hadn't told them where to go from there. Instead, he had just driven off without so much as a word. The 4 of them looked around. Dane seemed particularly unnerved at being so close to the water, despite it having been months since the Leviathan settled back to sleep. Suddenly, one of the shipping containers burst open, and a broad flannel shirt-wearing man stepped out. His face was buried beneath a thick beard, a shotgun resting against his shoulder as he approached the group. The man's stern, stony expression quickly changed into a wide grin as he jovially and unexpectedly pulled Dane into a hug.
"Welcome, my friends!"
The man roared with laughter.
"Oh, welcome!"
Who are you?" Sky asked.
Of course, allow me to introduce myself,"
he responded, letting go of Dane, who needed to catch his breath after being squeezed so much.
"My name is Jovianus. For safety, I watch over this camp,"
the man announced. Camp? Joe asked, looking at the wreckage.
"The Foundation has been getting more zealous with targeting those of us that are left,"
Jovianus explained, gesturing for the 4 to follow him as he walked back towards the container.
"So we had to take a less conspicuous approach to surviving, splitting the camps up into fewer people, dispersing everyone around a bit more, and of course,"
he swung open the door to the metal container. Inside the cramped space, there were 2 bunks either side, one above the other, making 4 in total, along with a sleeping bag on the floor.
"Staying in places the Foundation wouldn't think to look," Jovianus continued.
"We have to sleep in here?" Renee asked in disbelief.
"Better for avoiding detection," the camp's protector replied. "Otherwise, the next camp along is only 20 minutes away on foot, over in a warehouse, if you'd rather go there, but be warned, they have rats."
Although it came with a brief adjustment period, the group quickly acclimatized to living in the abandoned dock. Each of them came to appreciate Jovianus's efforts to keep them all fed with what few rations they had. The 4 of them started calling him Big Joe, referring to Joe as Lil Joe to avoid confusion. Of the group, Dane seemed to have the hardest time adapting. He was something of a conspiracy theorist, anxiously talking about the other great disasters throughout human history and wondering if the Foundation had been responsible for them all. Sky felt a little sorry for him, so they decided to humor his theory that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii was also the SCP Foundation's doing, despite occurring all the way back in 79 AD. Through all their various concerns about surviving in this anomalous apocalyptic world, Big Joe seemed to have a talent for keeping the group's spirits up. Whether it was by recounting them all with folk stories or turning bland food rations into more flavorful meals, he made the 4 of them feel safe, especially with his weapon never far away. That is, until one evening. A glowing red streak shot through the air not far from camp, catching Jovianus's immediate attention. It was an emergency flare, set up by the neighboring camp at the warehouse. Something was wrong. Grabbing his shotgun and urging Sky, Dane, Renee, and Lil Joe to stay put, Big Joe left, running off into the growing dark of the night to try to help. The whole group stayed awake, waiting for their protector to return, the next hour feeling like an eternity. By the time he returned, the sun had fully set outside. Even by the low light of their lamps inside the container, it was clear by his face that any and all optimism had drained out of Jovianus.
"There was nothing left of all. There was nothing left. All of them were gone, he explained, unable to believe what he had seen. There was this oil everywhere, corrosive like an acid, just burning through what was left of them. Trying to regain some semblance of composure, he urged the group to get some sleep, reassuring them that they would be safe for the rest of the night. Not one of them realized just how wrong they were, or that they'd never seen Jovianus again after they fell asleep. Renee was the first to discover he had gone missing, screaming with panic, waking up Sky and the two boys. After they had calmed down, Sky tried to rationalize what was going on. They were worried about Big Joe and the others, but he couldn't afford to lose their nerve and potentially attract the attention of a Foundation kill squad. "It's the Foundation," Dane babbled, terrified. "They found us. They're closing in. Oh, man." "Relax," Sky replied. "All of you chill. There are other camps nearby. Maybe Big Joe went to check on them too. See if what had happened to the warehouse group happened anywhere else. You don't think he would have told us?" Lil Joe retorted, seeming to be the least concerned about Jovianus' whereabouts. "We were asleep. It's not like him to wake us up. He knows we'd worry," Sky answered. "Well, what if he's dead?" Renee sobbed. "Don't say that," they replied. "She's right, though. He left his shotgun right here." Joe interjected again. "Whatever got the warehouse group killed him. It's obvious. At least I don't have to go by that stupid nickname anymore." "What the hell, man?" Dane yelled. "You're joking at a time like this? What's wrong with you?" There was an uncomfortably long pause. Everyone in the container turned to look at Joe, leaning against one of the metal walls with his arms folded. The other three were all thinking the same thing, although Dane was the first to say it aloud. "You killed him, didn't you?" "Don't be ridiculous!" Joe chastised him, backing away slightly, betraying his own little hint of fear. "You and Renee are hysterical. You both need to calm down." Before Joe could finish his sentence, a withered arm reached out of the wall and grabbed his throat. It looked like the rotting, decaying arm of a corpse, protruding out of a puddle of black mucus that now seemed to be spreading across the inner wall of the container. Renee screamed in horror as more of the black substance oozed from the arm, melting away Joe as it held him helplessly in its grip. It was then that a face peered through the oily patch smeared on the wall, the nightmarish visage of SCP-106, the Old Man. For a second, Sky thought about trying to help Joe. They could have pulled him free, but it was already too late. The corrosion was spreading. It looked like it would melt them too if they so much as touched it. Joe was gone. The remaining three of them burst out of the shipping container they had called home, afraid for their lives. "What the hell was that?" Dane screamed. "Oh man, I knew it. They've sent a monster after us." Sky barely paid him any mind, their attention grabbed by movement nearby. Someone had started running the second they had exited the shipping crate. They had been watching from a distance. Hey, stop!" Sky yelled, about to run after them. "Sky?" Renee's voice was cracking under the weight of her terror. Turning around, they saw it. The old man stood behind Renee. It looked even more grotesque under the low light provided by several distant fires in the ruins of cities the Foundation had destroyed, giving the horizon a hellish glow. SCP-106's withered, lipless face bore his rotting teeth, locked in a skull-like grin. It gave a sense he was gaining some twisted enjoyment out of what he did next. Renee had been frozen to the spot, sniffling in fear, her legs rigid and locked in place, until the old man clamped a hand over her shoulder. Then she cried out in a blood-curdling shriek of agony. More of the black ooze spilled from his emaciated fingers, dripping down her front while Sky looked on in terror. Renee had been the one person who had been with them the entire time, from the moment the Foundation unleashed hell. Every camp they moved to, Renee was in the same one with them. The pair of them may have not been a couple, but she had been the only constant in this anomalous apocalypse. And now, this sinister SCP was killing her. Fighting every urge to grab Renee and pull her free, Sky instead let themselves be led away by Dane. Choking back tears, they ran alongside him in the direction of whoever had been watching them. The shadowy figure was just about visible, although definitely still close enough to be heard. In the dark, there was the sound of a fall, accompanied by a pained grunt, indicating that whoever had been watching the container had tripped. Both Dane and Sky knew that this was their chance. Together they lunged at the figure before he had a chance to scramble back to his feet, with Dane pinning the observer down by his wrists. That was when the light of the burning city on the horizon illuminated his face. He was the jeep driver, the one who had dropped them at Jovianus' camp to begin with, the only other person, apart from Big Joe, who knew where their camp was. "You!" Sky declared. "What were you doing spying on us?" "I have nothing to say to you," the man spat. "Answer their question!" Dane yelled, slapping the man in the face, although he didn't seem to react. "What is this thing chasing us? Why did it kill our friends?" "You might as well tell us," Sky told him calmly. "After all, once that monster catches up, we'll all be dead. You were watching, expecting a result, right? Had to make sure none of us made it. Not that there's anyone left for us to tell if we did survive." "He's with the Foundation," Dane gasped, catching on quickly. "You had them send that corpse thing to kill us, man!" SCP-106, the undercover MTF agent corrected. "And yeah, it's here because we sent it. You all went underground hiding in your little camps. We had to look even closer to find you all. Ungrateful, all of you." "Ungrateful?" Sky exploded, enraged and offended at the idea anyone could justify all the death the Foundation had unleashed on the world. "What, you expect us to thank you for hunting your fellow human beings to extinction? Dropping nightmare after nightmare on us, and we're meant to be grateful for that?" "None of you understand what we're trying to do," the Foundation agent replied without a hint of remorse. "What we're trying to do is bigger, more important than your mundane little lives. The only way we can save humanity from it is by wiping you out." Before either Sky or Dane could ask what it was, a gloopy, oily smear appeared on the ground. Clawing his way out of it, the old man reached for the MTF operative, disintegrating him like he had done before. But the agent barely reacted, didn't cry out like Renee or Joe had. He was still, even as he was being melted by the slimy black secretion of SCP-106. It was as if the man couldn't feel the pain of what was happening to him as he died. A splatter of the same corrosive mucus spread onto Dane's sleeve. Freaking out as it began burning through his jacket, he desperately tried to wipe it off, only to smear it, spreading the dissolving substance further and crying out as he felt it eating into the palms of his hands. SCP-106 climbed out of its oily puddle, dropping the disintegrating MTF agent. He disappeared into the corrosive pool, vanishing from sight like he'd fallen into a ditch. Sky backed away, their eyes locked with the sunken stare of the old man, feeling their legs begin to freeze in fear just like Renee's. "Gun!" Dane rasped, laying at SCP-106's feet, slowly succumbing to the same fate that had befallen the others. Big Joe's gun!" he rasped again. With the last of his strength, he used his arm to grab the old man's ankle, howling in pain as more of the black substance oozed from the monster's wrinkled flesh. Sky turned and raced back towards the shipping container, hardly daring to look over their shoulder. Every movement, every tiny shift of shadow they detected in the corner of their eye filled their mind with the images of the old man bearing down on them, wearing that sadistic, skeletal grin. Sky pulled the heavy metal door open, using all their strength to get back inside. Their arms were numbed, trembling so much with terror that it was like they weren't attached properly. They fumbled about in the dark, their fingers brushing up against the weapon, resting in the corner where Jovianus had left it. Pulling on the pump, Sky turned, the gun raised, knowing that the old man was right behind them, and pulled the trigger. It gave a redundant click. It was empty, no ammunition. The gun had been just for show. SCP-106 reached for the weapon and pulled it from Sky's hands, the metal of it slowly melting as it was coated in the tar-like corrosive substance. Recoiling their hands from it, Sky went to dash for the door, only to feel the old man's bony, burning fingers hook into their back and drag them towards the greasy black stain he was leaning out of, pulling them into his domain. This world had been a living nightmare since the Foundation had revealed itself and unleashed an anomalous apocalypse upon humanity. But SCP-106's pocket dimension might just have been worse.
Dr. Trebuchet sighed, his breath fogging up the visor of his hazmat suit. He did a last-minute spot check, making sure he had his clipboard and pen. Then he reached for the shoebox, feeling its little occupant moving around as he lifted it up. The doctor turned as his newly appointed assistant, Researcher Watchell, barreled into the room. The researcher was late. Trebuchet couldn't even imagine ever being tardy to his first assignment, but the Foundation were insistent on training up their new recruits as quickly as possible. The exposure to a mostly harmless anomaly would, in theory, help to normalize some of the stranger SCPs that the organization dealt with. Dr. Trebuchet held back a cheap shot about Watchell being so late, as the assistant researcher hurriedly clattered into his own hazmat suit. Both ready, they stepped through the decontamination airlock after it had hissed loudly, sterilizing the air and the outer layers of their suits. Then the two researchers continued into the containment unit. Even with their hazmat suits on, the differences in temperature and humidity were instantly noticeable, like the feeling you get stepping off a plane after a long-haul flight. The cylindrical glass enclosure had been perfectly climate-controlled, filled with wetland soil and stagnant water. It was like stepping inside a terrarium, a tiny little pocket of swamp large enough for someone, well, something, to comfortably live inside. That something was SCP-811, sometimes known colloquially by her nickname of the Swamp Woman. However, since bringing her into containment, SCP-811 had given herself a different name, which Dr. Trebuchet used when addressing the slimy creature. "Aye?" he greeted, causing SCP-811 to turn and face the Para-Foundation personnel.
"Talkity what want?"
she hissed. She had shown the capacity for communication, but possessed a limited vocabulary and struggled with the proper pronunciation of words. Dr. Trebuchet clarified he was there to ask SCP-811 questions, to which she quickly responded with a request for food. Opening up the shoebox, a frog hopped out, which the Swamp Woman quickly stomped on and began to eat the dead creature. Although while she possessed a mouth, she didn't exactly eat in the sense that we understand it. Her body secretes a slimy mucus that, upon contact, causes a rapid rate of decomposition. Much like a fly, SCP-811 will vomit onto things in order to break them down, so she can digest their nutrients through absorption. She uses this ability both to hunt and as a defensive countermeasure against attackers, spitting out the waste of her food that collects in her stomach. Grinning at her own efforts, SCP-811 finished her meal and indicated she was ready to continue with questioning. Dr. Trebuchet handed his clipboard to researcher Watchell so that he could conduct the interview as part of his on-the-job training. "What is the earliest thing you can remember?" Watchell asked, reading from the board.
"Earliest thing?"
SCP-811 echoed, conveying that she didn't fully understand. Watchell stammered, unsure how to rephrase. "Early things," Dr. Trebuchet interjected. "Things before."
"Before box?"
A seemed to be understanding, indicating her containment chamber. Before box," Trebuchet confirmed. Appearing thoughtful for a moment, SCP-811 asked,
"Most before?"
Dr. Trebuchet nodded vigorously, telling her yes. Even though the Foundation had mandated this interview, he genuinely wanted to know how she had become like this. Immediately, SCP-811 gave sweeping demonstrative gestures with her hands and described in very vague levels of detail a man who had been taller than A herself, at a time when she was also much, much smaller.
"Was like man,"
she said, pointing at her own arm. What was like him? Dr. Trebuchet probed, trying to clarify what she meant. In response, A pinched her mottled green skin, its surface slick with mucus.
"This, not like A, like man, like people,"
she insisted. Her skin. She meant her skin had used to look human. Upon hearing the word skin from the doctor, SCP-811 repeated it, prodding at her arm, and then smiled. She'd learned a new word. When questioned further by Dr. Trebuchet, while Watchell felt increasingly uneasy nearby, the Swamp Woman pointed to the inside of her elbow. She described what she had experienced after this tall man had approached her.
"Pain stick here. Cold,"
A said. "Needle, A." Dr. Trebuchet encouraged her to use the right word, certain she meant she had been injected with something. "They're called needles."
"Needle here."
SCP-811 tried to mimic the sounds of the word, before then going on to explain that she had experienced intense pain soon after. With her hands, she started miming that something had come out of her mouth.
Red was very hungry. Ate man, skin like this."
Hearing her describe, even in loose, broken terminology, what had happened to her became too much for Assistant Researcher Watchell. As far as both he and Dr. Trebuchet understood what A was telling them, she had been injected with something while still a child, and then had eaten the person responsible. Watchell, who had children of his own, couldn't help but imagine the same horrible act happening to his own kids, and the thought of it made him vomit in his hazmat suit. Given her own chosen method of attacking and dissolving prey, SCP-811 couldn't help that she interpreted seeing Watchell throwing up as an act of hostility. It alarmed the swamp woman, causing her to hurriedly retreat to a nearby pool of stagnant water within her containment chamber, refusing to reemerge until Watchell and Dr. Trebuchet had left. Angered by the assistant researcher's lack of professionalism and how it had interrupted the most coherent explanation of SCP-811's past, Dr. Trebuchet filed a dissatisfied note with the SCP Foundation. It read as follows: "While I understand the appeal of training the new blood on something relatively harmless and as green as they are, could you please throw them at some other humanoid for a while, trying to actually get things done here?" Had Watchell been able to stomach what he had heard SCP-811 saying, and probably through more extensive interviews with the creature, Trebuchet could have learned the full extent of how the Swamp Woman had come to be. She had been able to give the broad strokes of it, of course, but her descriptive ability was limited. The story had definitely fit with what the Foundation already assumed to be the case, that at some point, A had been human, but what they hadn't been aware of was the actions of this unknown individual, a nameless man, or what he had injected the young girl with in order to trigger her transformation. At any rate, the only explanation the Foundation had was the word of SCP-811 herself. It was vague at best. At worst, it might not even have been recalled with any degree of accuracy. She could have been lying, if she had the capacity to lie, and the specifics of who she was before, why someone had injected her, and what with were all still a complete mystery to the Foundation, and not just to them either. Given her partial comprehension, SCP-811 had long been suspected to have grown up as a feral child, a youngster abandoned when they were only a few years of age, rather than as an infant. It certainly seemed to explain her limited understanding of human language. The fact that she could communicate at all implied that she had at some point lived among other humans, but hadn't fully developed before her transformation. But even if she had been able to communicate at an adult level, SCP-811 still wouldn't have given the full story to Dr. Trebuchet, not because she was keeping things from him, but because she simply couldn't. The trauma of growing up alone in the swamp, being turned into a monster, and everything else that had come before were all too much for her. She had at some point suffered a mental break, her mind shutting off the full details of her past as a defense mechanism. The Swamp Woman had been through far more and far worse than even she could remember, and unbeknownst to the girl who would later come to call herself A, the SCP Foundation had been involved. It had all started way back, a long time ago, and many, many miles away from where it would eventually lead to the birth of the Swamp Woman. Specifically, it began in Siberia. The SCP Foundation had learned of an infectious skin disease that had been discovered there by the GRU Division P, the Russian government's own anomaly containment organization. They had encountered a virus that was highly contagious and that would spread on direct contact with organic matter, but that was far from the extent of it. This infection would begin to transform its host, turning them into a horrific fleshy mutation that would attack any non-infected life form in an aggressive attempt to spread the virus further. The Foundation called it SCP-610, although the GRU-P troops had a different name for it. Roughly translated, they called it the flesh that hates. Now it was only through a combined effort between the SCP Foundation and their Russian counterparts in GRU Division P that this disease was contained to a single isolated area within Siberia where it had first been discovered. The Russian government at the time had agreed to keep the area under their watchful eye, and that anyone who became infected by SCP-610 would be killed immediately. Of course, nobody had accounted for the one who would get away. A Russian operative, a researcher within GRU-P, had become obsessed with SCP-610 since its discovery. The virus itself was horrific, producing abominable nightmares, but it could transform human physiology in mere moments, producing fleshy creatures that were almost unrecognizable as people. This scientist began to wonder if this transformative property of the virus could somehow be controlled, programmed even, then it may well hold the key to some of the greatest breakthroughs in medical science. He envisioned using it to grow replacement limbs out of tissue cells, or to trigger the reconstructive regeneration of bodily damage. The scientist just needed to figure out how to prevent SCP-610 from fully transforming someone. The only problem was, anyone infected with it was killed. So he took it upon himself to sneak into the isolated area in Siberia, where he could steal a sample of SCP-610 from the body of a recently terminated mutation, and he nearly made it away unscathed. The scientists' plans were quickly discovered by the joint effort between the SCP Foundation and GRUP. He had been requesting a sample through the official channels for months, and now he had taken one to experiment with and gone on the run with a new identity. Calling himself Alec Holland, the scientist fled the Foundation Russian agents sent to pursue him. As far as he knew, they were trying to prevent him from carrying out what he viewed to be a noble endeavor. But the Foundation knew that even if that tiny sample of SCP-610 was able to spread, it could cause a worldwide catastrophe. Whilst piloting a small plane, Alec was shot down over the swamplands of Louisiana. By the time Foundation operatives arrived in the area, all they found was a burning wreck. Little did they realize, Alec had been rescued by locals, who had taken him aboard their fan boat and rushed him to a hospital. He would later leave before his injuries had fully healed and return to the site of the crash to discover something curious. His sample of SCP-610 had been cross-contaminated with the swamp's stagnant water, teeming with algae and who knows what else. Alec was running out of time. He knew that if his wounds didn't kill him, he would soon be discovered by the Foundation and GRUP. Using a syringe, he gathered up the combination of the virus sample that had mixed with the natural properties of the swamp. There was no way of knowing what it would do, whether it would still mutate a person, or whether the disease's transformative effect had been altered. But he had to know, and he was living on borrowed time. Desperate, he raced to the nearest town, a tiny community near the swamp. Alec told himself that the first person he encountered would be his test subject. He had to see what effect this altered version of the virus would do to a human being. It just so happened that the first person he encountered was a little girl named A, and he wouldn't live long enough to see the full extent of what he was about to turn her into. Does the Black Moon howl? No, not yet. See the boy. He was born in a time before names. There weren't enough humans around to need them back then. He was one of a handful occupying a coastal village, using a tongue long since dead. They eked out a simple life, hunting, gathering, fishing. The only thing on most of their minds was surviving to see the next sunrise. Yes, a simple life, free of complications, until the hermit appeared. The boy would remember this man for eternity, haggard and thin, skin weathered by time and pain. A man that, emaciated, walking with a long, gnarled cane that honestly looked healthier than he did, shouldn't be alive. Even the boy, who had scarcely seen beyond the bounds of his village, knew that the hermit was unnatural, an aberration, an anomaly. He walked into the center of the village, sat down on a large stone, and waited. Nobody dared ask his business, nor what the hermit waited for. Then, a few days later, the Black Moon howled. The boy saw the village's youngest hunter freeze one evening while out on a walk. Not simply stand still, but freeze. Then, for an instant, he became solid black, a coal statue, and as soon as he'd changed, he was gone. Obliterated, not a trace of him remained. Such is the power of the Black Moon. It can make any conscious being disappear in an instant, turn black, then wiped from our plane of existence, never to be seen again. Its choice of victims seemed at each instance to be utterly random, but it would come for all who lived eventually. This is known to some as the howling of the Black Moon. Later that same night, the boy found himself talking to the hermit, who asked with small, frantic eyes what he had seen. When the boy told him, he let out a deep, rattling sigh. The boy, curious, asked him if he knew about the nightmare he'd just witnessed. The hermit looked up. He'd been the first one in the hermit's millennia of pursuit that had ever asked. In that moment, he knew that he had found his successor in the hunt for the death of ages. The hermit told the boy it went by many names. The Great Finale, the Pale King, but most common of all was the Black Moon. The entity existed beyond the veil of our reality, a creature of pure energy, though nobody could really be sure of its true nature. The hermit had been tracking it, learning about it, and trying to destroy it for thousands of years. And yet it only took him 4 pathetic minutes to tell the boy everything he knew. The boy, knowing still that something about the hermit was unnatural, asked how he came to be in this position. The hermit told the boy he was the counterbalance, a kind of chosen one, destined to face and perhaps even defeat the Black Moon someday. The counterbalance receives a number of truly extraordinary gifts for inheriting the responsibility: eternal life, eternal youth, near physical immortality. But they will be haunted by their purpose, doomed to watch everyone they love die around them, as they continue to hunt their only true equal and opposite, the Black Moon itself. The hermit in his own eyes had failed at his duty. He had grown weary, and now he needed to pass the duty of counterbalance on to another. That other would be the boy. He felt a sudden and profound change, along with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. He was no longer just the boy. Now, he was the counterbalance. He watched the hermit give him a slight nod of respect and then crumble into dust before his eyes. The boy, the counterbalance, looked up at the sky and saw the stars twinkling, so bright and so beautiful. Little did he know his battle with the Black Moon would outlast every single one of them. Does the Black Moon howl? Not without blood. The boy grew into a man as his village aged and then died around him. Decades passed, then centuries, then millennia. Tens of thousands of years watching humanity develop and grow around him as he continued his pursuit of that one elusive foe. As science and diagnostic technology gained ground, absorbing and then evolving beyond all the old superstitions, the counterbalance gained a better understanding of the Black Moon, though even then, it still remained essentially a stranger. The entity was entropic, a being of pure randomness and chaos without consistent form. It didn't exist in our universe, but it could exercise its influence here with so-called obliteration events, much like the horrible fate that befell the young hunter from the village. But that was only the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The counterbalance tracked and noted obliteration events. They were exceedingly rare at first, something that occurred once every 1,000 years or so, like a terrible curse. But he couldn't help but notice a concerning trend emerging. It started happening once a century, then once a decade. He could feel the terrible future stretching out in front of him. How, over their shared eternity, the Black Moon would gain more and more ground. Would there come a day where it took someone once a year, once a month, a week, a day, an hour, a minute, a second? It'd spell the end of all conscious life, a total victory for the Black Moon, the end of the universe, the death of ages, a complete existential obliteration. He was swept up in a sobering realization. He couldn't win this fight alone. However, while his hunt for the Black Moon had been largely fruitless, the counterbalance had discovered many other things along the way. Strange creatures, objects with extraordinary powers, and events that couldn't be explained with rational science. Perhaps something about these oddities, these anomalies, would hold the key to defeating his timeless enemy. And it hadn't just been these objects, entities, and events. He'd also discovered some truly exceptional people on his travels, minds and skills that rivaled even his own, despite his age. Perhaps they would be the ones to help him win. With the 13 most brilliant and trusted people the counterbalance ever met, he decided to form a council. And from this council, they forged and directed an organization dedicated to understanding and counteracting the strange in all its forms, with the secret hope that their search into darkness would yield the answer to the Black Moon's downfall. He called it the SCP Foundation. They would secure the anomalous, contain it, and protect all of humanity from its influence. The counterbalance also took on a new title, befitting of his new role, the Administrator. And even the Black Moon itself was given a moniker, in hopes of robbing it of some of its frightening power. SCP-001. Does the Black Moon howl? Only at the blind. The year was now 1987. The SCP Foundation had been operating for over a century, and thanks to their secret possession of anomalous wisdom and technology, Their own advancement was thousands of years ahead of the rest of humanity. While there still wasn't a silver bullet solution to the Black Moon, and its deadly howls were becoming all the more frequent as the decades went on, the Foundation did have some irons in the fire to combat it. Their ability to gather intel on both the entity itself and its obliteration events had improved considerably, thanks to their new global information network. Their top minds were also working on a highly classified device known as the Singular Conceptual Bunker, which may one day come in handy for combating the extra-dimensional entity directly. But the most valuable piece of information they ever gathered about the Black Moon was this: it couldn't howl when it was being watched. The very act of engaged observation defanged it. The problem is, how can you observe something that doesn't technically exist inside your own reality? In order to pull this off, the Foundation would need to get extremely creative. Thankfully, creative solutions to strange problems are the Foundation's specialty. Flash forward to 1993. Enter Dr. Moto, a brilliant young scientist and conceptual engineer working for the SCP Foundation. With the administrator's consultation, he started the Key Project, an arm of the wider Project Oromasdes, the umbrella initiative for using modified anomalous objects in the battle against the Black Moon. The goal of the Key Project was relatively simple. If people couldn't observe the Black Moon directly, then the Foundation could make proxies of the Black Moon that could be observed, almost like a kind of voodoo doll. These new anomalies would only need to satisfy 3 criteria: the inability to operate when being observed, a hostility to conscious life, and the ability to end conscious life of their own volition when not being observed. Through conceptual engineering, a link theoretically could be forged between these objects and the Black Moon, allowing observation of them to stop the obliteration events. However, despite being a good idea in theory, Dr. Moto's efforts were marred with errors and tragedies. One object wasn't deadly enough, simply appearing behind people in a threatening pose when they weren't looking. Another one killed purely through collateral damage, a giant sculpture of a human head that immediately attempted escape by barging through Site-01, the Center for Anti-Black Moon Operations, and killing 19 people in the process. Another one of Moto's objects, a huge black sphere, simply immediately exploded, killing 12 people. And in the most horrific misstep of all, one of Moto's objects caused a mass death event in a nearby hotel, where 142 people were spontaneously incinerated when the object, a series of interlocking stalactites and stalagmites, were left unobserved for 0.2 seconds. Almost all of Moto's objects were terminated in the aftermath, either being too useless or too dangerous to keep around. The young scientist felt a deep shame, but forged on. He made one truly brilliant creation that satisfied all the criteria: a sculpture, incapable of moving while being watched, but would snap the neck of the nearest conscious entity if it left unobserved for even a fraction of a second. Its relatively minimal killing left it easy to contain without causing mass deaths, and despite all of the other deaths that had sadly occurred during the Key Project, Dr. Moto believed that the lives saved in the long run by stopping the Black Moon's howls would justify the sacrifice. The problem is, the Key Project didn't stop anything. Not long after this, there was the first recorded double obliteration event in Rome, where a young tourist couple had both been obliterated simultaneously. All the deaths in the Key Project had been for nothing. The Black Moon was only getting more powerful. The shame and the guilt was too much for Dr. Moto. He left a note in his office reading, "We've been looking at nothing. I'm sorry, Administrator. I failed you, sir." Moto's corpse was later found in the sculpture's temporary containment chamber. His neck snapped. The Key Project was, in summary, shut down, and its one surviving creation transported to Site-19 in late 1993, where it was designated as SCP-173. Another painful failure for the Administrator. Back to the drawing board once more. Does the Black Moon howl? Not while the stars shine. Millennia stretched on. Almost everyone died except the Administrator thanks to his gift, or perhaps curse, as the counterbalance to the Black Moon. Science marched on. The SCP Foundation marched on. But all this progress, all this power, was nothing against the incomprehensible influence of SCP-001. The Black Moon was howling more frequently than ever, all the way up to the year 3156, when the Foundation launched the SEEK project under the support of Project Oromastes. As more and more people were wiped out in frequent obliteration events, the administrator became painfully aware that perhaps the answers to the Black Moon problem wouldn't be found on Earth. Using state-of-the-art technology, with a little help from the anomalous, the SCP Foundation began work on an autonomous spacefaring vessel that could search the stars for the key to the Black Moon's destruction. It was an awe-inspiring creation, a huge craft powered by artificial intelligence with a universal translator, cryogenic units, and hundreds of autonomous drones to perform more targeted searches. SEEK was waved off into the unforgiving depths of space. The administrator could only hope that it would come back with worthwhile answers. The first of the 3 notable planets SEEK arrived on was one theoretically capable of supporting human life, except for its brutal and constant blizzards and snowstorms. When SEEK's drones were deployed, they did discover signs of civilization based around sentient spherical creatures, but no signs of actual life remained. Records and statues found across the planet seem to indicate that the Black Moon was responsible for the destruction of the planet's civilization, causing so many obliteration events that the remaining survivors went mad from the fear and stress, leading to mass death in the ensuing chaos. The next planet was discovered centuries later, in the year 3499. While this planet could also theoretically support human life, it suffered from frequent volcanic eruptions that rendered much of its surface a flaming mess. However, there were still the dormant ruins of a once advanced civilization of conscious beings. Much like the prior planet, they'd been driven extinct by Black Moon obliteration events a century before the SEEK even arrived. Unlike the last planet, however, it seems that they accepted their fate and went gently into the night. The planet was now overrun by billions of armored bat-like creatures that operated on pure instinct, and thus were not considered conscious enough to be obliterated. The final planet was reached in 3764, and was the most fruitful of the 3 discoveries. This planet was hyper-advanced, fully urbanized, and covered in sprawling megacities, with records and technology over 1,000 years ahead of Earth. Before the Black Moon killed almost all of them, there were a species of humanoid telepathic fungi, and had developed an awareness of the Black Moon's existence that was on par with that of humanity's. They even had their own equivalent of the SCP Foundation actively working on countermeasures. And most amazingly of all, SEEK found one surviving member of the species on the planet, cryogenically frozen. The craft was immediately instructed to collect the survivor and return home for interrogation. The administrator was preparing for what could be the most important conversation since he met the Hermit all those thousands of years ago. Does the Black Moon howl only when waning? When the surviving creature, codenamed Sage, was returned to Earth, the administrator was eager to finally speak with it. Like the rest of its now extinct species, Sage spoke through powerful telepathic mind waves, which only the administrator, thanks to his counterbalance abilities, was able to receive at close range without being harmed. Incidentally, it wasn't long until the very fact of the administrator's nature as a counterbalance came up in the mental conversation. Sage could tell, just by being in his presence. They discovered a number of vital truths over their brief time communicating. That Sage's survival had been pure luck, for starters. The Black Moon is still very much capable of obliterating conscious beings in an unconscious state. The administrator also learned that he was merely the latest in an extremely long line of counterbalances across time, space, and species. Though everyone but him had waived this duty, passed it on. Sage had one question to ask the administrator in turn. What is SCP? The singular conceptual bunker being worked on and perfected for thousands of years by now by the Foundation's top scientists and conceptual engineers. The administrator replied, "Victory, but it will take a very, very long time. Specifically, so long that he would see the stars go out around him, one by one." Shocked, Sage asked him what good victory would do him then. Rather than say it aloud, he replied with a thought. Sage paused and said, "I see. How blasphemous of you. Hopefully it works." After this, the administrator proceeded to the singular conceptual bunker and entered it, leaving instructions for the Foundation to be run by a newly formed O5 Council in his indefinite absence. Thousands of years later, in the year 5011, Sage spoke one more time, repeating the words, hopefully, hopefully, before turning solid black and disappearing. The Black Moon had claimed one more victim, but billions more had gone in the interim. The administrator had no more answers to give. At least, no more answers that anyone but him would understand. He was inside the singular conceptual bunker now, loaded into a device known as Tome, an experimental memorial module meant to pick up and record all the last messages of every dying civilization across the universe when the time finally came. All he could do was wait, and wait was exactly what we did. Does the Black Moon howl? Yes, yes it does. Years pass, too many to count. It's a time after names now, and Tome sits in the very center drinking in the end of the universe. The last of all the human colonies across the universe were obliterated by the Black Moon back in the year 7329. So long ago. But some of the final messages of fear, panic, and distress still echoed around in the administrator's mind.
Hello? Is there anyone here? We require assistance. It's taking people every day. We need help. There's barely anyone left. We need help. Hello? Hello? Cabal 0943, we have abandoned the false flesh. We have abandoned the false flesh. The shepherd's crook broken neath my knee. Cabal 0943, Cabal 0943, forgive us! Forgive us! We're going to leave this on. It's so dark outside now. It's blotted out the sun. I have to go now.
Respond. First convenience. Emergency. Situation developing. Require additional resources.
My fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault! Rip my brain out now, rip my brain out now!
And a small child, the last on Earth, simply asking, "Hello?" into an indifferent microphone. But the administrator had to wait, as the singular conceptual bunker became the solitary conceptual bunker. He was the last conscious being in the universe, and still he needed to wait as the stars went dark outside. Only when there was nothing outside but black was it finally time for the counterbalance's long game to play off. There was nothing left of our universe. The only thing here was the SCP and the Black Moon itself. With everything else gone, the Black Moon only had one conscious being left to obliterate. It opened the door to the solitary conceptual bunker and stepped inside. This doesn't make sense. How can the Black Moon, an entity beyond our dimension, beyond physical form, take a step? Good question. The same question, incidentally, that was going through the Black Moon's mind as it entered the bunker. It didn't look at all how the entity expected. It was like a bar, a counter, with rows of bottles behind it, a jukebox playing in the corner. A man stood behind the bar cleaning the glasses. The counterbalance. The administrator. He said, "Well, there you are. Certainly took your time. Can I pour you a little something?" This only served to increase the Black Moon's confusion. It had form here, dark smoke compressed into a vaguely humanoid shape. It could speak. It could think. None of this made any sense. The being that had just wiped out all conscious life and seen the very death of the universe was truly and utterly confused. The administrator just seemed to be enjoying himself, preparing for a confrontation hundreds of billions of years in the making. The singular conceptual bunker, or perhaps the singular containment bunker, was a truly ingenious creation. A place of pure ideas, where everything inside was on the same level. Here there were no immortals, no gods, just ideas on the same level playing field. And it was time for the Black Moon's idea to come to an end. It was a trap, and the entire universe was the bait. Without warning, the administrator pulled up a shotgun from underneath the table and unleashed both barrels into the Black Moon's chest. The creature took the hit and fought back, dragging the administrator to the ground, beating him, strangling him. He could feel the light fading under the monster's relentless assault, until he managed to get his desperate hands on a glass ashtray. He beat the monster over the head with it until its grip loosened, and he was able to slide out. There, the killer of the universe was on the ground before him. He grabbed the monster, held it in place, and beat it to death. He was gravely injured by the battle, but the Black Moon was no more. Here in the singular conceptual bunker, he had won. The administrator, no longer the counterbalance in the absence of the Black Moon, hobbled over to the jukebox, produced a single beautiful coin from his pocket. He pushed the coin into the slot, wheezed a pained breath, and said, "The thing is, this place is only information. There's nothing else out there. Not even matter. The universe closed its doors a long time ago. But this place can go from information back to matter with just the press of a button." Let's see what happens when we introduce something to nothing. For a second it looks as though he might fall, but he doesn't. Instead, he slams the button on the jukebox, and with a relieved laugh says, "Let there be light." And there was.
Step right up, folks! We've got all kinds of refreshing and tasty treats here for you today! Popcorn, peanuts, cotton candy, and even fried dough! Yes, sirree, here at SCP Explained, we're offering the top-of-the-line anomalous delectable foodstuffs for all your circus-themed fun-time occasions. And that's because today, yes, today, on this YouTube platform, our infamous acronym doesn't stand for Secure, Contain, Protect. It stands for Sweet Confectionery Products. And let me tell you, dear viewer, the SCP we're looking at today just might be the most decadent, durable, and dangerous dessert that's ever desired to be devoured. We're talking about SCP-3077, or as they are better known, the Sugar Golems. These little fellas are safe class and also totally harmless, so long as you take the proper precautions. What's the matter, don't you believe me? Don't you think it's nice of us to cover a safe SCP now and again? And hey now, why all this dull talk about rules and regulations in the first place? You don't go out to the carnival to not take wild and exciting risks. Every spinny, twirly, and whirly ride on the fairgrounds comes with a statistically higher chance of a tragic mishap befalling you and any other thrill seekers around you. But we all take that chance anyway for the extraordinary rush of the experience. And such is the wacky and wonderful ways of our adorable and questionably edible chums, the Sugar Golems. Don't you just love them, folks? Ain't they a sight for sore eyes and a pang for sweet teeth? Well, we're only just getting started. The best is yet to come, ladies and non-ladies. So pull up a chair and be sure to watch what we've got in store. You can make like a piece of old candy and stick around. Now that's a knee slapper, ain't it? Sit back, relax, and make sure to enjoy the show. You should also subscribe to SCP Explained if you'd like to continue to be entertained. Hey, that rhymed! What do you know? I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Ha! How droll. While SCP-3077 refers to the anomalous substance contained in Site-81, the semi-humanoid instances, which are nicknamed Sugar Golems, are themselves an animate and independent byproduct that naturally spawns from SCP-3077 when it is allowed to exist outside of containment procedures. The most important of these containment procedures being that SCP-3077 must remain at a constant temperature of well below its freezing point, and only be stored in containers full to capacity, lest its aforementioned byproducts attempt to breach containment. The total volume of SCP-3077 within the cryogenic containment unit equals almost 2,200 liters, and it is believed to be the only known quantity of the anomalous substance in existence. For the sake of clarity in distinguishing between SCP-3077 and its byproducts, we'll be referring to the main object contained by the Foundation as SCP-3077, while the gooey little guys who we know to spontaneously split off from the source of SCP-3077 will be regarded as SCP-3077-1. As mentioned before, SCP-3077-1 instances have been affectionately dubbed the Sugar Golems. Every instance of SCP-3077-1 resembles an approximately 1 meter tall, gaunt humanoid, composed of a pure sugar-derived substance commonly known as treacle. And that's molasses for all y'all yeehaw cowboys over there in the US of A. If you've ever played the classic board game Candyland, you'll have some idea of what an individual instance of SCP-3077 looks like from the beloved and often remembered character of Gloppy, who lives in the molasses swamp section of the board and is also fittingly made out of molasses himself. Yes, indeed, Gloppy is truly a delight for a weary Candyland player to meet. What did you say? Are you folks too young to know about Candyland? Well, that factoid certainly makes this narrator feel pretty old. Then again, I am taking on the mannerisms and attire of an old-fashioned carnival barker, so I suppose a bit of novel antiquity comes with the territory. Regardless, the golems are each composed of roughly 7 liters of sweet, syrupy goodness. And very much like everyone's favorite character, Gloppy, they all lack defined lower bodies and can all emote through crude yet oddly endearing vocalizations in the place of intelligible speech. While their facial features are simplistic and misshapen, the contours of concave eyes and gaping mouth are usually present. The exact number of these eyes and mouths is subject to variation, much like the color of the board spaces in a wonderful, wholesome family game of Candyland. While each SCP-3077-1 instance is around the same size, the body proportions and overall shape of each instance are rather fluid, pun fully intended. Some possess oversized arms or bulbous heads, while others might be conjoined to an adjacent sugar golem, as if to show that the two are inseparable as a pair of best buddies. Or, as some others might put it, a couple of BFFFs, best friends for fancy frolicking. They really are quite friendly looking, aren't they? And aren't they? They sure are. For the only thing that these sugary sweet SCP instances want is to be in the company of human beings just like you. Yes, you! Who else would I be talking to? It's a hard life for this worn-down Connie, let me tell you. These little sugar golems love what they do and do what they love. But that doesn't mean that it's time for fun and games. Even though SCP-3077-1 instances want to hang around human beings, they don't tend to stop at hey and hello or whatever those appropriate greetings sound like when they are being gurgled by a diminutive molten sugar monster. Things can get out of hand real fast, just like an orange cream popsicle melting in the sun of a late summer's day. Now listen up, it's important that you pay attention to what I say next. I'm about to book learn you about what to do if an instance of SCP-3077-1 enters your personal space. The results of prolonged contact with this SCP can end badly if you're not careful. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of the chewy details of your grisly fate, and I promise that it won't be a cakewalk. So don't be a nerd and listen up. Yes, that's right, I called you a nerd. You know, like Nerds, the candy. How do you folks seriously not know Nerds? They were a classic Halloween candy from the Wonka Company, and they were very popular back in the day. Oh, what's that you say? How long ago was it back in the day for me? That's a bit of a rude question, wouldn't you say? Oh, I won't you go ahead and knock it off with the wise guy questions? What are you, a pack of smarties? Ha ha! I said smarties, get it? It's just like the... never mind. Let's just move on to the explanation of how to survive a close encounter with this SCP. That was the main reason you came all this way to this here educational and entertaining video presentation after all. To pick up where I left off, instances of SCP-3077-1 have a tendency to seek out nearby human life. The reason for doing so is surprisingly simple and alarmingly, well, alarming. These sticky saccharine simulacra are solely set on slithering into people's mouths for the purposes of gaining total control of their bodies. Yes, you heard that right. Believe it or not, the same anomalous property which animates the sugar golem's treacle bodies is apparently capable of overriding the human nervous system from the inside. And that's no joke, folks. While these tasty treats might sound sweet to eat, you'll be a puppet of meat from your head to your feet if you don't complete the tasks I entreat. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 attempts to enter your mouth, you must remember first and foremost to keep your trap shut, blocking it with a mask or similar article of clothing if need be. Next, you must use your limbs and all available implements to batter the attacking golem away, while you do your best to keep a distance of at least arm's reach between yourself and the instance. It should come as a relief to our rational people that SCP-3077-1 instances are severely limited in their physical capabilities, and an adult human of average fitness can easily hold one off if they know what to expect. The tricky part comes from the amorphous properties of the instance's viscous treacle bodies, as well as their anomalous ability to regenerate from any physical trauma. The only way to permanently destroy an instance of SCP-3077-1 is to expose it to temperatures above its melting point, which for you sticklers out there is approximately 176 degrees Celsius. The most effective weapons against SCP-3077-1 instances include firebombs, flamethrowers, and your run-of-the-mill convection ovens. If it is at all possible to contain the instance within a sealed vessel such as a large Tupperware or wooden barrel, then you ought to do whatever you can to prevent the candy creeps from running amok. While ordinary below-zero temperatures are unable to destroy the anomalous treacle of SCP-3077, instances of SCP-3077-1 can effectively be slowed down or stopped completely if you put them on ice. Whether it's the hot foot or the cold shoulder, some form of extreme temperature should always be weaponized when defending oneself from an SCP-3077-1 instance. Any attempt to crush or smash an SCP-3077-1 instance will only result in the bad bonbon breaking apart and reforming into several more belligerent bite-sized blighters. A human under siege by the sugar golems might find themselves quickly outnumbered if they foolishly attempt to use a melee weapon against the anomalies. Basically, it's like a more delicious version of the popular arcade video game Asteroids. No? I guess that reference was from before even my time. At any rate, instances of SCP-3077-1 are difficult to destroy without access to heat or freezing. The tendency of the molasses menaces to increase in number is made even worse because of the fact that any amount of SCP-3077 outside of containment can generate a nearly infinite number of SCP-3077-1. While even an army of SCP-3077-1 instances is far weaker than an equivalent pack of hunting animals, the ability to continuously multiply and physiology that doesn't experience the consequences of fatigue means that, given enough time, these sugar golems can outlast any amount of human resistance until they roll over their preferred prey like a slow, insurmountable, syrupy tsunami of surrender! Seriously scary stuff, some would say. But what happens next is the real kicker, folks. Mind this ballyhoo's somber spiel. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 manages to, against all odds, clamber its way into a human chatterbox and hijack the poor sap's nervous system, the victim is immediately classified as SCP-3077-2. SCP-3077-2 instances are easily distinguished from unaffected humans on sight alone. Dark tendrils of SCP-3077 can be seen visibly moving beneath the skin, and often emerge from the mouth to crisscross the instance's face, like makeup, the world's most disturbing circus clown. That's not all! After the tragic treacly transformation takes place, the movements exhibited by the instance of SCP-3077-2 will become crooked and jerky like a marionette puppeteered by a frustrated chimpanzee. During this time, the instance remains fully conscious, retaining whatever cognitive faculties it has possessed previous to its classification, but it is unable to attempt speech or exert autonomy over its own actions. This fun fact was discovered by studying the EEG recordings of several SCP-3077-2 instances, and is brought to you by the United Guild of the Existentially Terrified. If an instance of SCP-3077-2 happens to wander its way into the vicinity of any humans that haven't succumbed to the process of consuming SCP-3077-1, it will proceed to put on a jaunty performance for its newfound audience. This peculiar display involves clumsy efforts at dance choreography and the throaty singing of unsettling atonal melodies that would make your annoying cousin's road trip songs sound like they're in tune. These awkward performances continue until the audience departs from the view of SCP-3077-2 instance, or the instance expires. This confirms that the point of the gesture is to entertain, as without an audience, the SCP-3077-2 instance is not compelled to make any noises of its own accord, and in general doesn't do anything other than move around aimlessly. In the event that any number of SCP-3077-1 instances escapes from containment and causes the creation of SCP-3077-2, members of the Mobile Task Force are instructed to never stray from the line of sight of a currently performing SCP-3077-2 instance, and to approach it steadily, before restraining the instance while causing minimal harm to the body. SCP-3077-2 instances can be useful for running further tests on the anomalous properties of SCP-3077, and there are simple procedures that allow an instance to be kept alive indefinitely in containment. Any damage sustained during capture can severely hamper the efficiency of these life-sustaining procedures. The worst-case scenario is that an SCP-3077-2 instance expires before being securely contained, as this will cause the SCP-3077-1 instance to emerge from its host and resume its relentless attack on all nearby humans. It is far easier to simply deal with SCP-3077-2 instances accordingly, And this is because SCP-3077-2 only ever attempts to continue the performance and possesses neither the intention nor the capacity for retaliation. If it is deemed necessary for the effectiveness of a recapture effort, it can be permissible for the Mobile Task Force to allow instances of SCP-3077-1 outside of containing to find purchase within SCP-3077-2 to increase the ease of containment and lessen the risk of Foundation personnel being affected. The performances of SCP-3077-2 instances are rarely physically intensive enough to make capture too difficult, but it can be said that the whimsical antics of these affected humans are anything but predictable. During some rare and special performances, and if the SCP-3077-1 instance in control of SCP-3077-2 instance is feeling especially daring, it may try to show off an array of woefully inadequate acrobatic skills. Front flips that are more like belly flops, back flips that could be mistaken for pratfalls, and the sort of tightrope and trapeze acts that are better left to the imagination. In lieu of prior incidents, the Foundation strongly advises that if for any reason an instance of SCP-3077-2 must exist in containment, it must always be prevented from being at an altitude of more than 6 feet from the surface of the floor, especially if any humans it would perceive as an audience are located directly beneath where its performance would take place. Regarding the creation of further instances of SCP-3077-2, requests from any level of Foundation personnel at Site-81 or elsewhere must be granted permission to proceed by SCP-3077's head researcher because of the horrific implications of what happens to the still-aware human mind while the body is affected by SCP-3077-1. This process is only to be approved for use on D-Class personnel. That's right! And even then, in the event that all the rigmarole of the paperwork goes through, it is not acceptable to create an instance of SCP-3077-2 merely for the purpose of providing live entertainment to fellow researchers. After all, not a single one of us should be quick to forget the grotesque and highly regrettable spectacle that was Dr. Dietz's deplorable D-Class dancers. Every researcher involved with that ethical nightmare was reprimanded severely, and the colorful novelty costumes and jangling bells that all former D-Class personnel were made to wear after being reclassified to SCP-3077-2 have been permanently confiscated. Let the cotton candy machine and peanut dispenser located just outside the containment unit of SCP-3077 serve as a stern reminder that there's a time and place for monkey shines and tomfoolery, and sometimes, yes, even now and then, a highly secure Foundation facility is neither the right place nor the right time. In case you haven't picked up on it, there are very few practical applications of SCP-3077 due to the fact that its status as a food dish is negated by the consequences of consumption. The main reason for tests to be administered on SCP-3077-2 instances is to discover if there is a safe method of extracting an SCP-3077-1 instance from the body of its host without causing the expiration of the original human. Unfortunately, due to a persistent lack of success, the experiments have been discontinued indefinitely. But that just won't do. How else are we supposed to know if these things actually taste as good as they look? I won't rest until everyone is able to harmlessly ingest a sugar golem of their very own. I might be old-fashioned, but to me, the safe object class isn't just a designation, it's an invitation. I ought to be completely okay doing whatever I like around a safe object because it's safe. That word should actually mean something. Ding, dang, darn it. And I don't mean that in the sense that the SCP Foundation uses it, meaning an anomaly that doesn't present an active threat to containment efforts. And more importantly, there aren't that many anomalies that are also delicious candy. And I want to eat this one. Sorry, I lost my cool a bit there. I just have a sweet tooth, and my brain is constantly drifting back to my nostalgic childhood memories of playing Candyland with my family. That was before they all decided that they wanted nothing to do with me because I became so obsessed with dressing up like a carnival barker that I drove away everyone who's ever cared about me. Other than that, my job here at the Foundation explaining confectionery SCPs is the only thing I have left in my sad, sad life. Some days I feel less like Gloppy and more like a real Lord Licorice. In hard times like these, a fellow could really use some entertainment to cheer himself up. Wait, just a flea-jumping moment! What was that? What's the big idea? How did these escaped instances of SCP-3077-2 get in here? They're all supposed to be in safe containment a few floors down! Did somebody else from the research team let them in here because they knew I was in costume standing in front of a pretend fairground set? That's in pretty poor taste, don't you think? Pun very much intended. I should probably report it to the head researcher. That would be the ethical, reasonable thing to do. Then again, look at them go. Those are sure some hilarious dances. I'm definitely seeing a snappy attempt at doing the Charleston. A classic. And is that one doing the worm, or is it just kind of flopping on the floor? I think one of these instances knows about that Fortnite stuff all the kids are into these days, but I'm not sure if the human element or the golem that decides what dances it knows. Either way, this was exactly what I needed to feel so much better. For once, it feels like I'm actually at a carnival instead of just pretending to be at one now. This is the greatest performance I've ever seen in all my years, which you can be sure that there have been a lot of. Now, go check out SCP-261 Pan-Dimensional Vending Machine and SCP-5962 One Night at McDonald's for more anomalies that will really whet your appetite.